www.sutterkids.org, our website, in the ACEs Aware Community tab. So feel free to come back to the workshop when you are ready, and know that a video of this workshop will be available for you. A few housekeeping items. All participants will remain muted during the workshop. Becky will take time at the end of the workshop for addressing questions, so please use the chat function to add your question, or feel free to raise your hand when the Q&A portion occurs. There will be a 15-minute break during the workshop to allow for you to attend to your needs, albeit a bio break, to check emails, or to have a mindful moment. Thank you all for being here, and we look forward to this journey of growth together. Now, it is my honor to turn this wonderful morning to grow to Becky Haas. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you, Michelle. And I really want to thank Michelle and Sarah and their team for the hard work putting this together. I've been in conversation almost a year with Sarah after I spoke at an ACEs Summit in California virtually last year. And so I really want to thank them and their hard work for bringing this together. So welcome, everyone. We're so glad to have you joining. As we begin our training today, I want to tell you why this content is so near and dear to my heart. I first learned about trauma and ACEs working for police to reduce drug-related and violent crime, domestic violence, and reduce recidivism. And it was in that context that I learned about this topic. And I felt like I had literally heard the cure for cancer, and that I needed to tell my town, about trauma and the risk factor to addiction that ACEs could be. And so I partnered with a psychology professor at East Tennessee State University, and a earlier form of what you're going to hear today, we began to train while still keeping our day jobs. And in 3 years, we trained over 4,000 professionals, from police to hospital workers to mental health to teachers. And in 2018, our work was recognized by SAMHSA as a model for other cities to follow. And so what you're going to hear today is we call our secret sauce. It's basically going to be handing you the trauma lens that, as the services that you offer and the roles that you serve, that you're going to be able to now see what it means in working with a trauma survivor, as well as delivering services to someone who's a trauma survivor. And I really want to underscore what Michelle said, because the number one overarching principle of trauma-informed care is do no harm. So if you do need to step away a minute, as we talk about some of the topics, some of the videos that I'll share, I may preface them by saying this again, because we definitely want you to feel comfortable in this learning setting. Now, I do know that part of the training today is geared towards those that are going to be implementing a Handle with Care program. I'm excited to say that the police department that I worked for was the second site in the United States that launched that program after it was developed in West Virginia. And now fast forward several years later, and our governor passed a Handle with Care law. And so I've been helping train teachers and police and mental health all across the state of Tennessee as we're rolling out Handle with Care statewide. All right, so buckle up, here we go. So about an hour and a half in, we'll take a break and then get to finish in time to hopefully get a few questions. All right. So the first module we're going to talk about in our learning objectives is so we have a shared understanding of trauma. You know, if we had a longer session today, we might do a little poll and see what people know, if anything, about trauma, or what behaviors could be expected of trauma survivors. But since we don't, we're just going to cover the basics. We're going to talk about the identification of trauma. Trauma is like the wind. You don't really see the wind. What you see are the effects of the wind. And so we're going to talk about what are some of the effects of trauma, and then the awareness of the effects of trauma to brain development. And when I first started this work early on, people would talk about as if it was a fad or a movement. moment. But, you know, many eyes are on the state of California and the great work you all are doing, and your Surgeon General, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who's certainly a leader in this field. And so I always like to underscore that this is science, and we're going to talk about that in our training. All right, so in understanding trauma, one of the main takeaways from today is that it brings up an underlying question. Instead of what's wrong with you, what happened to you? And that we're going to see that symptoms really are adaptations to trauma. And then one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this content is because it's really good news that healing happens in nurturing relationships. I was just on a call earlier this morning about a project I'm helping with healthcare, a statewide healthcare program in another state in Florida. And one of the things in discussion was that by learning a trauma-informed approach, that maybe as high as 80% of the effects of childhood trauma can be mitigated by services and a community building resiliency, where about 15% maybe need a little more targeted care. And then that would leave about 5% that would then need the clinical interventions. And so this is really a very inspiring and hopeful message that you're going to hear today. All right, so the first video is a quickie by Brene Brown, and she's going to define for us the difference between empathy and sympathy. And this video is about 2 minutes long, and we're going to watch it together now.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay, powerful little video there that helps us to really see the difference between empathy and sympathy. And as she so articulately says in the video, that empathy is perspective taking. It's seeing something from someone else's side. When I was working for police and learning about this topic and beginning to educate my community, I'll never forget one day being in a program, an outpatient program for felony offenders with addiction. And in one of the groups, a young woman was newly ordered from court to attend. And she began to tell her story, how their youngest memory as a child, her mother's a heroin addict, and as a youngest memory as a child was pulling her mother up out of the toilet as her mother would shoot up with heroin because she'd get violently sick. And her older sister would be screaming across the house, let her drown, let her drown. And then she went on in that group session that day to talk about being left alone by her mother for a few weeks. One time in a snowstorm in our area, her sister was 10, she was 8, and they had a brand new baby sister, 4 weeks old. And these little girls are navigating this place with this newborn for 2 weeks before they finally called their grandpa. And she told that day how they would hold a mirror under the baby's nose to see if breath was coming out. And as I heard that story, thinking of empathy, I said to her, now remember, this is a police program and I work for police, but I said to her, I'm so sorry that that's your story of your childhood. And I'm so sorry that that's a story with your mother. Those are the memories of your mother, because professionals, in truth, we don't pick where we start in life. And we are learning now in our communities, many of those we serve, many of our coworkers have come from very hard places in life. And though trauma may be fact, it doesn't have to be fate. And so that day I just validated her story and I told her that I was sorry. That was her story. And that a part of her treatment plan, being in that program, was counseling, and at no cost to her, she would be allowed counseling sessions throughout the year that she was there. And the next time I was over there, I saw her in another setting and she handed me a little piece of paper. I put it in my pocket. When I got home that night, I pulled it out. I remembered I had it. I pulled it out and it said, "Thank you, Miss Becky, for treating me like a person." And so trauma didn't wave away her charges or give her a free pass out of jail, but empathy was just woman to woman, understanding that she had come from a very hard place as a child. All right. And another reason that I was really drawn to educating professionals about this topic was I was amazed as a grant writer and a grant program manager much of my career at the improved outcomes that services that already delivered effective resources to the community, how that having this trauma-informed lens really helped to improve outcomes. So typically I talk about the Paper Tigers story, the story of an alternative high school in Walla Walla, Washington, but we have our own Paper Tigers story here in our local community. So in 2015, in 2016, we trained the the alternative high school principal, Melanie Ryden-Bacon, in the center of the photo there. And then Dr. Andy Clements is on the other side of her. And within a very few months, this high school that has about 140 students a year, alternative high school, they changed the name from alternative because Miss Ryden-Bacon said, you know, the kids we're an alternative to what? We're teenagers. And by using a trauma-informed lens, this school has historically had attendance of 55%, and it was raised up to 90%. Typically, these young people in this school, 140 of them, would have annually renewed or earned 200 credits. In the first year, they earned 1,155. The second year, they earned 1,044. And typically of 140 students, they would have graduated only 8. But the first year they graduated 65, the second year they graduated 48. And so I saw by just using a trauma-informed service delivery method that it began to improve program outcomes. So what is trauma? The SAMHSA definition of trauma involves 3 E words, and I'm going to share the definition here, but it's kind of a mouthful. So then I'll break it down 1 E at a time. So SAMHSA says that trauma is an individual trauma results from an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances experienced by an individual that are physically or emotionally harmful or even life-threatening, that can have lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning in many ways, mentally, physically, socially, emotionally, and even a spiritual well-being. All right, let's break that down 1 E at a time. So here we have some categories of potential traumatic events. Now, as Michelle said at the beginning, we may see our own story in this list. And if we had more time together today, there are things we could add to these lists, okay? But for the sake of time and to illustrate the definition, we want to see that some potential traumatic events could be emotional abuse, sexual or physical abuse, domestic violence, witnessing violence, bullying, cyberbullying, and institutional abuse. Or then we see chronic stressors of poverty, racism. On Saturday this week, I'll be doing a statewide training for childcare providers in the state of Tennessee about trauma and race in the classroom, addressing trauma and race in the classroom. And so we see that the historic trauma around racism is something that is more a part of a national conversation. But what about children in a home where there's an invasive medical procedure going on of the child, of the caregiver? Certainly now during the time of COVID, many families have been impacted by that. Or what about community trauma? We had in 2018 the Gatlinburg fires that really were very detrimental to a small community. And I know over on the West Coast that is something that is more a frequent part of the story of children that are being relocated due to these traumas, or historical trauma. Or what about children living with a family member with substance abuse disorder, or a family member incarcerated? And then we see the other column is loss, death, abandonment, natural disaster, accidents, terrorism, or war. Okay, so what about the second E, or the potential events, the experience that could be caused? It could be impacted by how did it happen? When did it happen? Where and how often? So you and I could experience the same event and it be traumatizing to me while it's not traumatizing to you. And some of the factors that can determine the trauma by the event are these things indicated on this slide. And as I was beginning to develop trainings when I was working for police, I had some long conversations with some of our seasoned officers and investigators. And in talking to a 20-year veteran of crimes against children, she told me that in that particular year, she had investigated 20 child homicides that had occurred, children's death at the fault of the caregivers around them, that 20 of them, children 2 and under, and of the 20, 18 were due to the neglect or the abuse of the caregiver. And she was saying that it's very unusual that a young child would suffer neglect or abuse at the hands of a stranger. She said it's not that it doesn't occur, but she said it's most likely that it happens at the hand of a known caregiver. So you could see how that, by definition, could bring about a greater experience of trauma by the event. And then we see the effects of trauma. So the effect of trauma on an individual can be conceptualized as a normal response to an abnormal situation. So back to my story of the woman in the jail diversion program. So the day that I said to her, when I learned in her story that she and her older sister had been home 2 weeks with a little newborn sister, I said to her, why didn't you tell anyone at school? And she said, oh, we thought everybody at school is living this way. We thought everybody at school doesn't get supper and is locked in their room when their mom is having a party. And and I'm sure as seasoned of professionals as that are on this training today, you're aware of those types of story. So what was this young woman telling me? While she's telling me about a situation that seems very unusual to me, very challenging to me, to her, it was a part of normal life. So we start to serve now people in our fields of expertise that are coming in with the effects of trauma. They don't see things as they really are. They begin to see them as they are through the lens of trauma. So survival mode is supposed to be a phase that helps save our life, but not meant to be how you live. So many people in our communities are actually living in survival mode. All right, so this is a very important slide. Sometimes when I've trained police departments, nurses, they actually take this slide and they make a laminated version or maybe save it as a PDF, because this is something you need to be very acquainted with. When I was training 200 school nurses a few summers ago, every nurse almost is shaking their head up and down because they know that they're going to have the frequent flyers in their school with a headache, with a tummy ache. And yes, it could be a headache, could be a tummy ache, but it could be related to witnessing violence in the home that night. Our local schools report 300 to 400 students a year, and we're a small community, about 65,000, but they report 300 to 400 students every year classified as homeless. Now, the school board members tell me that that doesn't mean they're sleeping in a car or living under a bridge, but what it means is that when the child leaves the classroom, the teachers and the school administration has no idea where that child goes because they have no permanent address. So you can imagine what that is like in the life of the child leaving school. School now is the stability. And that's why it's such a joy to be working with schools. And later on, we're going to be doing some work with your schools there in Sutter County, is we see that the schools are providing the stability. So some of the physical reactions to trauma, the hyperarousal, where you're in the fight or flight mode, or hypoarousal, where you're in the freeze, just locked up, withdrawn, isolated. We see the things like the headaches, the digestive complaints, but then look at the emotional. Are you working with patients or clients that are anxious or having maybe on the verge of panic attacks? And what you're talking about that day might be enrolling them in a food program or getting them an appointment for a mental health provider, but yet they have this increased anxiety or anger or shame or guilt or fear, avoidance. And then we look at the behavioral column, where we see young people at such an early age using alcohol, substance abuse, eating disorders, anger-related issues, or isolation. I headed the homeless task force in my community when I worked for the police, worked right with the mayor and the city manager. And it was puzzling until I understood about trauma and ACEs, why we could have open beds in the shelter and people on the street, but yet they would not go into the shelter because of, in their story, they had had things that happened that were very traumatizing inside with strangers. So for them, they felt it was safer to remain isolated out on the street. And then we have cognitive, and this is what really hits home when you're training teachers. Last Friday, I was up in Virginia doing a convocation for a whole school district. We had several hundred teachers, and we're talking about helping teachers understand when your students have the inability to concentrate, memory lapse, learned helplessness, distraction, intrusive thoughts, that it really has very little to do with fractions or geography, but it has to do with the fact they're navigating a very hard life outside of school. So right here is like the wind. We see branches falling, shingles loose on the roof, and these are ways that we can identify trauma. So one of the things that's very compelling about trauma is that trauma in the life of a young child can derail brain development. So the brain has a bottom-up organization. The bottom controls the most simple functions, such as respiration, heart rate, and blood pressure. The top area, the red, the brown color there, that controls more complex functions, such as thinking and regulating emotions. So at brain development, when at birth, where the brain is underdeveloped, a child is born with all the brain they're going to have, but the brain is going to grow in size as the child grows. But during the 90s, it's labeled the decade of brain development, understanding brain development, and many prestigious research centers like the Harvard Center of the Developing Child, we're going to see some videos here in a minute, begin to look at how the brain developed. Because I think before we knew about a child learning to crawl, then to walk, and to babble, and then to talk, but the researchers found the brain is developed the very same way. The brain is developed by what part of it is being used. And then trauma can have a real detrimental effect on someone in a young age when that brain is being developed, because it's going to cause them not to develop the part of the brain that's ready to go to school. So we're going to see 3 little short videos from the Harvard Center. They're about 1.5 minutes each, and then I'm going to comment after we watch all 3. So the first one is about brain architecture. The second one is about the principle of serve and return. And then the third one is on how toxic stress derails brain development. Here we go.
A child's experiences during the earliest years of life have a lasting impact on the architecture of the developing brain. Genes provide the basic blueprint, but experiences shape the process that determines whether a child's brain will provide a strong or weak foundation for all future learning, behavior, and health. During this important period of brain development, billions of brain cells called neurons send electrical signals to communicate with each other. These connections form circuits that become the basic foundation of brain architecture. Circuits and connections proliferate at a rapid pace and are reinforced through repeated use. Our experiences and environment dictate which circuits and connections get more use. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent. Meanwhile, connections that are used less fade away through a normal process called pruning. Well-used circuits create lightning-fast pathways for neural signals to travel across regions of the brain. Simple circuits form first, providing a foundation for more complex circuits to build on later. Through this process, neurons form strong circuits and connections for emotions, motor skills, behavioral control, logic, language, and memory during the early critical period of development. With repeated use, these circuits become more efficient and connect to other areas of the brain more rapidly. While they originate in specific areas of the brain, the circuits are interconnected. You can't have one type of skill without the others to support it. Like building a house, everything is connected, and what comes first forms a foundation for all that comes later.
Thank you for your patience. I'm not sure my video's here giving me a hard time. We'll get it. Well, I'm going to go ahead and try to get the third one and then see if we can go back and get the second one. Well, I have no idea. I apologize. All right, so to save time, we got to keep on course here. So the first video illustrated about brain architecture, and the second one here talks about a process like the tennis racket there of serve and return, where the action between the caregiver and the child, well, looks like it might be working now, have to be interactive. That's a part of the development process. I think it's going to play. Let's see if we can get it here.
The key to forming strong brain architecture is what's known as serve and return interaction with adults. In this developmental game, new neural connections form in the brain as young children instinctively serve through babbling, facial expressions, and gestures. And adults return the serve, responding in a very directed, meaningful way. It starts very early in life, when a baby coos and the adult interacts and directs the baby's attention to a face or hand. This interaction forms the foundation of brain architecture upon which all future development will be built. It helps create neural connections between all the different areas of the brain, building the emotional and cognitive skills children need in life. For example, here's how it works for literacy and language skills. When the baby sees an object, the adult says its name. This makes connections in the baby's brain between particular sounds and their corresponding objects. Later, adults show young children that those objects and sounds can also be represented by marks on a page. With continued support from adults, children then learn how to decipher writing and eventually to write themselves. Each stage builds on what came before. Ensuring that children have adult caregivers who consistently engage in serve and return interaction, beginning in infancy, builds a foundation in the brain for all the learning, behavior, and health that follow.
Well, all right, I'm going to move ahead. All right, so the second video, the first one talked about brain architecture. The second one talked about the serve and return. And I really want to emphasize to you as professionals that a child must have the serve and return to be able to develop the brain. And then the third video, it showed a little child in a crib and siren sounds and things that would be very upsetting to a child, and no caregiver to calm or comfort that child, then how that over time is going to cause the child to develop a very different part of their brain. So here is some medical evidence that I like to present in the training that really shows what those three videos portrayed. So we have two children the same age, but they're two different children. And here's the PET scan of their brain. So the one that's labeled healthy brain, notice the areas that are circled, and how colorful those areas are. Now, that is the upper part, the cortex of a child's brain, and that's the part of a brain the child needs to have developed to be able to go to school. Now, on the other side of the brain, the other side of the slide, notice this side, it's labeled an abused brain. I would have actually probably labeled it a neglected brain. It's a child the same age growing up in an orphanage in Romania. And I know because of having family that adopted a little child many years ago from China at the age of 3, that when they were able to go and to adopt her in China, they learned at the orphanage that at 7 o'clock at night, all the children of the age of walking or above were tied to their bed by their ankle to try to control the children, because they only had about 6 caregivers for every couple hundred kids. So, being a mother and a grandmother myself, there's no way you could manage that kind of behavior, but that was their way they did it, was tying the little child to their bed. And so when my niece first came home, she would rock herself to sleep at night. And my sister's other children did not do that. My children did not do that. Why? Because they were held in the arms of a loving caregiver who would soothe them, who would rock them, because of the attachment. So professionals, notice in front of you there the science. And notice these 2 children now are sitting side by side in Head Start, or these 2 children are sitting side by side in kindergarten. And we've asked our teachers to teach them the same, help them learn the same, help them score on state testing the same, but without incorporating some new skills into our classrooms. You see right there that the children are not coming in with the brain developed in the areas where they need to be able to succeed at school. Until I went to work for the police, I had never in my life heard the phrase cradle to prison pipeline or school to prison pipeline. And the more we understand about trauma, the more we understand about brain development and ACEs, the more we understand why that is a fact. But I'm so thrilled to be among champions around the world that are raising awareness to this topic, as you are in Sutter County, so that we can dismantle these pipelines in our lifetime. So the fire alarm of the brain is located in the amygdala. The little bottom of the brain there, you'll see a little tiny gland that has labeled amygdala, and the top part of the brain is the cortex, as I mentioned earlier. So what happens is we're working out of our cortex. The child is having that serve and return, give and take with the caregiver. They're developing that part of the brain. But say if while we're on the playground or in the park, or we used to go camping up in the mountains with our boys when they were growing up, and a couple times we came a little close to bears. And so when the bear's in the campground, then pretty much the cortex is meant to shut down and our amygdala goes to work. But the thing with the amygdala is it can only produce fight, flight, or freeze, okay? All right, let's see this little video. It's about 4 minutes. It's a little cartoon fashion about how brains are built.
Science tells us that the experiences we have in the first years of our lives actually affect the physical architecture of the developing brain. This means that brains aren't just born, they're also built over time based on our experiences. Just as a house needs a sturdy foundation to support the walls and roof, a brain needs a good base to support all future development. Positive interactions between young children and their caregivers literally build the architecture of the developing brain. Building a sturdy foundation in the earliest years provides a good base for a lifetime of good mental function and better overall health. So just how is a solid brain foundation built and maintained in a developing child? One way is through what brain experts call serve and return interactions. Imagine a tennis match between a caregiver and a child, but instead of hitting a ball back and forth across a net, various forms of communication pass between the two. From eye contact to touch, from singing to simple games like peekaboo. These interactions, repeated throughout a young person's developing years, are the bricks that build a healthy foundation for all future development. But another kind of childhood experience shapes brain development too, and that's stress. Good kinds of stress, like meeting new people or studying for a test, are healthy for development because they prepare kids to cope with future challenges. Another kind of stress, called toxic stress, is bad for brain development. If a child is exposed to serious ongoing hardships like abuse and neglect, and he has no other caregiver in his life to provide support, the basic structures of his developing brain may be damaged. Without a sturdy foundation to properly support future development, he is at risk for a lifetime of health problems, development issues, even addiction. It's possible to fix some of the damage of toxic stress later on, but it's easier, more effective, and less expensive to build solid brain architecture in the first place. One of the things that sturdy brain architecture supports is the development of basic emotional and social skills, an important group of skills which scientists call executive function and self-regulation can be thought of like air traffic control in the child's mental airspace. Think of a young child's brain as the control tower at a busy airport. All those planes landing and taking off and all of the support systems on the ground simultaneously demand the controller's attention to avoid a crash. It's the same with a young child learning to pay attention, plan ahead and remember, and follow lots of rules. Like all of us, kids have to react to things happening in the world around them, while also dealing with worries, temptations, and obligations on their minds. As these demands for attention pile up, air traffic control helps a child regulate the flow of information, prioritize tasks, and above all, find ways to manage stress and avoid mental collisions along the way. Having this ability is a necessity for positive and level mental health. Developing effective air traffic control, overcoming toxic stress, and building solid brain architecture are things kids can't do on their own. And since strong societies are made up of healthy, contributing individuals, it's up to us as a community to make sure all young people have the kinds of nurturing experiences they need for positive development. To build better futures, we need to build better brains.
All right, so notice in that little film, we saw the theme repeated about serve and return, as well as air traffic control. Now, before I talk about this slide, let's go back to the video a minute. So serve and return in that video said, liken the serve and return process as building bricks. So if you're going to build a house or build a factory or build a shopping center, and you may want to use bricks for it. Well, for a child to have the bricks to build future buildings in their life, they need to have the serve and return. So according to the Center for Disease Control, the #1 form of child abuse is child neglect. Well, if that statement serves true all across our nation, then how many children are not getting the serve and return? That's why in the state of Tennessee, where I've written curriculum that's professional development for 5 years for childhood teachers, because we know that they are the best buffer in helping to recover some of the things that could be lost in brain development to a child growing up in a home where there could be toxic stress ongoing. So we have the serve and return makes the bricks, and the video said that one of the buildings the bricks will be used to build is air traffic control or emotional regulation, okay? So that explains why children come into a preschool or come into a classroom and just have emotional outbursts, because they've not developed, they didn't have the serve and return, and they did not develop the emotional regulation. So in 2019, when I was working in healthcare, they sent me to Nashville to talk to our Senate Health Committee. I had about 7 minutes. You always love those kind of presentations, or you have to boil it down to what is the most succinct, what is the most striking information that I can give our state legislators. And this is one of the slides I chose. So we have here professionals, typical brain development is a pyramid in this fashion, where they have a whole lot of cognitive skills being developed in the brain, the upper part of the brain, the cerebral cortex is being developed because the child is getting a lot of serve in return. And then we see the minimal amount of the amygdala is being activated or developed because they have the caregivers to help to nurture them. You know, I have 2 grandchildren and a third on the way. I can't hardly do a presentation without mentioning my precious grands. And when our oldest grand, who started kindergarten this week, when she was about 3 years old, I was at their house one day and she wanted to build some tents. And so I said, go in the living room and get some blankets and we'll make some tents. And she calls me Nammy. And she said, no, Nammy, I can't go in there. And I said, why? And she said, Nammy, there's a wolf in there. I said, Paisley, there is no wolf in your living room. She said, oh, no, I'm convinced. She was convinced. So I held her little hand. I went in there and of course there wasn't a wolf. We got our blankets. We made our tents. Well, a few weeks later, we were there for dinner one night and our son, who's a great big 6'4", very athletic, he said, Mom, look at this. He said, Alexa, make a wolf. And boy, can Alexa do a good wolf howl. And I said, son, you better dial Alexa back a bit to make her be a butterfly or a frog, because your 3-year-old is pretty sure there is a wolf in the living room. And so I'm telling you that whole story to show you how that our little grandchild, you know, is experiencing some uncertainty about this wolf howling, but yet we're able to come around her and provide that support and that care. So her survival mechanism is being engaged in a very small amount, but our children that are growing up in homes with ongoing abuse, with addiction in the home, incarceration in the home, violence in the home, this is the way a child's brain is being developed. And so a child has a highly developed survival part of their brain. That's why I was offered a job at our 3-state regional healthcare system, 22 hospitals, because they realize now that when that survival mechanism, that amygdala is that overdeveloped, it's releasing high amounts of cortisol into the body. And we began to see an unexplained amount of autoimmune diseases, increases in COPD, diabetes, heart disease, certain types of cancer, because an overactive amygdala is bringing into your system the amounts of cortisol that are very unhealthy. And so again, we see in the role of a teacher, these children sitting side by side, and this is the way the 2 brains have been developed. Okay, so this Tennessee in 2016 launched some curriculum called Building Strong Brains, Tennessee. It's excellent. I became a trainer in their material. And so one of the slides I really like from their curriculum, it illustrates the effects of stress. Now I want you to notice the little girl in the pink blouse in all 3 settings, okay? So we all have positive stress, you know, maybe public speaking, maybe a job interview, those types of things, certainly around COVID and now dealing with new variants and all that can be, you know, stressful. But say if you're getting a job interview and you're a bit nervous during the interview, but boom, they call you that afternoon, you get the job where you're all over social media, you're calling and texting friends and family. And so while it was a bit unnerving for the interview, but now, you know, it's something that you're going into confident. And so a certain amount of positive stress is helpful in our lives. But notice now the middle picture. Notice the size of the boulder has changed and it's labeled death in the family. That is hard. That is very hard to deal with. But notice this little girl could not navigate that boulder by herself. But what does she have at the top? She has a support system. And again, that's why today's training is helping you to see the importance of community organizations like yourself can help to mitigate the effects of that trauma by providing the support system. But then notice over in the far side, the little girl is facing impassable boulders called toxic stress. And those are labeled abuse, parental, addiction, and neglect. And notice she has no support system. And that's highly likely because the people that are involved with the toxic stress are the people that should be providing the healthy support. So if we get real scientific, put it on a graph, it would look like this. We see positive stress of that job interview or the public speaking, where it peaks up. Our hands are sweaty, where our heart might be beating fast. But after the job interview and a couple hours later, or maybe they're in the interview, the owner of the company or the employer says, we're going to offer you the job. And then your stress goes down, or maybe tolerable, maybe a loss of a family member or a loss of a pet. Maybe if you've lost a family member, that stress is very high at the time it happens, and then it begins to go down. But now you come to a first Father's Day or Mother's Day or birthday, and then here come the memories again. But notice that over time, with healthy support, that stress goes down. But look here, toxic stress. And that is why, I could give many quotes of your Surgeon General, Nadine Burke-Harris. She talks about how that she, as a pediatrician in San Francisco, knew that she could help children. As she learned about ACEs, though, she learned that we needed to, if you liken trauma to lead poisoning, we could help children live with lead poisoning, maybe deal with symptoms of it. But I love her quote where she says, why don't we go to the house and see if we can find the source of the lead? And we'll talk more about that. So this is the level of stress children are living under when it's household stress. So some of the factors that can increase the impact of trauma is blaming or shaming. That we see that when someone is being violated in some way, how that they're being blamed or shamed, or that it happens at a very early age, or they're being silenced or not believed, or, as I said earlier, talking to the crime investigator of child homicide, is that the perpetrator is a trusted caregiver. So are these really problem behaviors, professionals, or are they adaptations to trauma? So as I said earlier, the amygdala can only do 3 things: fight, flight, or freeze. So these sets of problem behaviors that are often attributed to children or adult clients we serve might really be survival mechanisms they've developed. So we want to shift your thinking now in the training to recognize these symptoms and these problem behaviors as adaptations to trauma, or they could be used as communication of deep needs. Okay, so if you look at fight, pretty self-explanatory there, flight or freeze. So behavior is like an iceberg. We only see the small portion above the surface, but below the surface are the feelings and the emotions driving the behavior. So the misbehavior we see of a child's attempt is often a child's attempt to solve really another whole problem of which we're unaware. When I'm training teachers, I'll talk about how that problem behaviors have nothing to do with the fractions or the geography or the math that's going on in school that day, but it could be very attributable to dysfunction and hard places the child is navigating away from school. So what does trauma look like? Well, I have many different trainings, and this training is kind of I put the pictures in here of what it could look like in an elementary type school setting. So some of what trauma could look like is a little child on the playground that never joins in the games. And it's not that they're shy, but they feel that it's safer if they stay all alone. Somehow when they're in a crowd, maybe it's a trigger that they remember bad things happened when you're around people, maybe being bullied or made fun of. And then we have the one angry, a little child playing with other children, and maybe to a caregiver or a teacher that witnesses this whole scenario, there was really no reason to get that angry. But this child is like a little landmine that just is set off very easily. Well, that just really illustrates there are underlying things that contribute to that behavior. Or the child that's disconnected and just staring into space, or the child that is watching for the bear in the room. I live out in the country, so to speak, here in Tennessee, in my area. We're in a very wooded area, and it's common with the 37 years we've lived here, we'll see a black snake from time to time. Now, my husband always assures me that those black snakes are our friend, and he has not convinced me of that yet. And as our boys were growing up and now they're married and on lives of their own, the boys, we'd find a snake and dad would come and relocate it over to the tree area or something like that. But I am on high alert for black snakes in certain parts of the yard where typically they like to hang out, the wood pile, that kind of thing. Well, lo and behold, when we needed a new garden hose recently, my husband goes to the store and brings home a black garden hose. I've screamed at that black hose. I've jumped high in the air. I've run from that black garden hose. Why? Because I'm set a little high on watching out for the black snake. So see, once you see some of the things related to experienced trauma, then behaviors start to make a lot more sense. I love this slide. I saw it in 2015 in the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. Because I do train so many teachers and child care providers, it's very interesting to see in the purplish area behaviors related to trauma. And then we see on the far right behaviors related to ADHD. But notice in the middle how much of the behavior overlaps. So if you're a 5-year-old and you're diagnosed with ADHD, you're started on a regimen of medicine, which I'm not saying that that wouldn't be the need there, but when I've trained mental health providers, I'm just sharing this information, and many times they're kind of pumping the brakes a bit to see if some of this underlying behavior is related to trauma, and then it could be avoided a diagnosis of mental illness to a little child, which could actually be another form of experienced trauma. So I want you to just see the similarities of these two situations. Now, here's something that I like to do to get kind of people interactive. So since we're all on a screen and but maybe there, wherever you are listening to this training, it might be something that you kind of think about that you could do, whether you're working with children or adults. And this comes from Dr. Dan Siegel, the Whole Brain Workbook, which, depending on what kind of service you're in, I would encourage you to consider building up a little library of trauma books and materials. Our libraries here locally, several of them, have a little section now. If you've experienced trauma, or if you're a professional that would like to help people mitigate the effects of trauma. And one of the libraries during COVID, they had a section for youth. And because programs, libraries were shut down last year for several months, youth programs were shut down. Some of these great professionals are just so dedicated in our area that they put a tub of books outside the office on the sidewalk by the door of the office for youth to come by, mindfulness coloring books and things like that, so they could still have some impact to the youth while things were still shut down. But here we see Dr. Siegel's illustration with the hand of the brain. So these upper 4 fingers, this is the cortex, okay? And the thumb, that is your amygdala. So while you're listening to this training, your thumb, your amygdala, is tucked in like a sleeping bag, and the cortex is wrapped around it in like a little fist, okay? But if while we're in the training, were to see a black snake or the bear in the room, the literature calls this flipping your lid, flipping your lid. So your cortex shuts down and your amygdala goes to work. So at Topper Academy in the alternative high school, when a child comes in to see the principal, maybe there was a fight, maybe there's cussing, swearing, something that warrants a visit to the principal's office, I want to underscore here is that trauma is not an excuse to hold people accountable for behaviors. But when the child would come into the principal's office, do you know the first thing Miss RB does? She turns around to her her chalkboard and she draws a little stick house, because she's been illustrating the teenagers about their upstairs and downstairs brain. And she'll say, Joey, what happened? You're got in a fight. Where you at? Where you at? Upstairs or downstairs? And Joey will say, Miss RB, I'm downstairs. I had a visit last night with my biological mom, and man, I'm just all tore up to see her again. Even though it was good to see her, I have so many questions and big emotions. And he said, but last week I stayed upstairs all week long. And so, these schools start to report fewer and fewer of these outbursts because children are learning about upstairs and downstairs brain. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk about building resilience, positive childhood experiences, and protective factors. Okay, so some more literature that came from the Building Strong Brains Frameworks Partnership is, if you could imagine in all of our brains a metaphorically placed fulcrum, okay? A fulcrum. We all have a fulcrum in our brain, okay? So if you as a child, or I as a child, had many, many negative or positive experiences, that fulcrum is shifted to shape our life view. So if your life was filled with things like maybe my childhood, we certainly did have some struggles, but more than not, I have many, many happy memories of growing up in a big family with many siblings. And so my life view would be more on the positive side. But to the woman that I was sharing her story earlier from the prison diversion program, with the mother locking them in their rooms at night because of her drug addiction, or leaving them all alone with a new baby, when we see that the fulcrum has been shifted where life view becomes very negative. Many years ago in my life, when my boys were teenagers, I really saw a need to help encourage parents. And so I got involved with our juvenile justice system, and for 5 years was a facilitator of juvenile justice education around character building, things about shoplifting, underage tobacco. And in that journey, I was so surprised to see how many young people had no hope for the future, had such a negative life view. Well, professionals, as we understand trauma, now we know what positions the fulcrum. But again, the good news about trauma and learning about ACEs is that we can shift the fulcrum. And that's what they begin to do at Topper Academy. So they asked the superintendent of schools for permission that if students were on task with their work, they were getting it done on time, they were having good attendance, would they allow that school to have a one block every Friday, 45 minutes long, that they called incentives. And the superintendent agreed to it. And then they did a focus group with the students and said, okay, we can have an incentive class on Friday. What would you like to do? Oh, and here came the ideas pouring in. And we had the school resource officer over there who began to do guitar lessons because some of them wanted a music lesson. And then they got a weight room. They put together a weight room of just, if you want to use gym equipment, you can find it on Craigslist or Marketplace. I could even put you in touch with a few pieces that are in my house that mostly hang laundry that needs to be ironed. Okay, so they put together a little gym. They started a community garden, and now they grow and jar little jars of salsa, and they go down and sell it at the farmers market. And they got drones, and they started a class on doing drone photography. And when I trained a juvenile court judge in the same town here, she told me, she said, Becky, something very unusual has happened. The kids that we have on our caseload in the juvenile court that are a part of Topper Academy, they have told us they don't want school to end for the summer. Now, professionals, how often is that the story of a teenager not wanting to get out of school for the summer? But what happened is the school became a place of hope and inspiration to these young people. And how did that happen? We shifted the fulcrum. All right, so we're going to see two videos back to back. Now, I wish we were in person or where we could maybe see and have a little more feedback. First thing I want you to know, both of these are true stories. We're going to watch Chad's story first, then Josh. Chad's story is a part of curriculum with Futures Without Violence. It was funded by the Department of Justice. Chad is going to tell you in his own words his story of growing up with a violent father. Now, the reason that I'm going to show you this is that as we watch Chad's story, I would like you to put in the chat room who you see helping Chad to navigate this difficult place in his life. And that's the reason I show this video, though it is a little bit of a hard story to watch. You'll begin to see some people in his life setting that are going to come up to be his support system. Then the next one, each are about 5 minutes, is Josh's story. Josh is going to tell you in his own words about his hard story. And then when we watch Josh's story, I want you to go in the chat and I want you to put who you see giving Josh support, being his support system, like the little girl on the boulders, okay? She was able to climb hard places because of resilience, because of having a support network.
It's just hard with I mean, I was just a kid. I mean, because here everybody knew our business, knew what was happening to us, and it was brutal. Oh my God, there's a school. If you go right up here, there's a turn, and you can situate it.
It's a tough thing back here.
Yeah. This is crazy. There were some good times though, like we'd have a good 30 minutes or so before we heard the sliding glass door open. And one day he came in and he actually had pizza, like supreme pizza. And another day, it was fine. And another day he came in, for no reason, he just smashed my mom's head against that cabinet there. Just thinking of, just to the left of where they're playing, it's where my brother and I would play. My dad, he would come home and we had to be really good at sports and stuff, so. There's one time where we're sitting, I knew it was coming. I knew my brother, Bobby, I knew that he would be the one to bear the brunt of it. And so I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Chad reminds me of a lot of the kids that come through here. Angry, very angry. And you could tell he just didn't want to connect with anybody. And you could tell he was hiding something. He always came in with a nervous stomach. My stomach hurts, my stomach hurts. And he finally came clean and told me his father had major anger issues. He said, you know, I need to talk to somebody. And I instantly thought of Coach Morrow.
Chad wasn't a football player per se. He was just a kid that had energy that needed to do something. He needed to be a part of something because I don't think he had anyone as a role model or someone showing him what to do. On the whistle,
Coach Morrow was the only person I really trusted in this town. He was always there.
Yeah. There was times I would give him a ride home. We would talk, sometimes we wouldn't talk. But it was interesting to have a discussion with someone, a young man who had no one to talk to.
He was the only one there for my graduation. Even my family wasn't there.
You're doing good. You're okay.
I just remember when you were walking across, I just remember looking up. He had this big old, just ear to ear grin.
It takes a village to raise a child. And it doesn't matter what nationality, what race, we're all from the human race. If you interact with someone, it shows them that you care.
Good memories, you know? Yeah. You gotta hold on to those.
It's love thy neighbor. It's what we should do.
When's the last time you saw him?
About 8 years ago. And actually right over here is Lucille's barbecue. The best barbecue you'll ever have in your life. And Coach Morrow actually took me there, like after high school graduation. But take this right. It's gonna be your first right over there. Just pull in, not this one, but. I freaking knew it. I freaking knew it. I did too. I knew something was up.
No,
I knew something with that. I knew it. I knew you all were doing something.
No, you didn't. There he is.
I heard you in town. I knew you couldn't pass up some Lucille's, man. Oh, good to see you. I'm so proud of you. You've done well. You've done well.
Okay, I'm not going to go out to the chat. I don't want to mess up my thing, but I'm hoping some of you typed in there, Coach Morrow. And then the lady, she's not named in the white blouse. That was a teacher in Chad's school. So can you see how that Chad is navigating this very hard place in life? But can you see how delighted he is at the end that they surprised him by reuniting him with Coach Morrow? Could you see in his story how he told no one came to his high school graduation but Coach Morrow? Okay, now let's watch Josh's story. His situation is different and his support system is a little different too. Let's see if you can identify. There we go. I think I've had to watch these videos hundreds of times to not get tears in my eyes. I would love to meet these two young men someday.
From what I understand, his father passed away, and he would have pictures of him in his locker. Some students thought it would be a good idea to rip down those pictures and harass him and bully him for missing and loving his father.
Going through what I went through, you kind of keep to yourself. You don't know who you are or anything. You're just walking through the space, empty space. It's kind of like a puzzle. You're trying to find your way to the good things in life.
No one wants to be bullied. Everyone wants to feel like they mean something to somebody.
It's definitely a hard 4 years of your life, you know?
Even like a few words can affect someone so negatively.
I'd sit in the cafeteria alone. I wouldn't talk to anyone. Even if people invited me to sit with them, I didn't feel this was my place to be, you know?
Coming to a city school, a lot of people said, you're just going to make it worse. I didn't know what else to do for him. So yeah, we just took the jump. I was pretty scared, you know. I kind of thought the city experience, maybe a bigger high school rather than a small town high school, it just might be better.
I hope that attending the new school, I would be treated like everyone else. Yeah, I just wanted to make it and just be a normal kid. I was sick and tired of being a no one. I wanted to be someone and I wanted to reach out to people and show who I was.
I just remember at first they called him the doorman. They thought he was weird.
It was definitely kind of weird. It took a while for people to adjust. But once people realized that he was continuing with it, it almost became something to look forward to in the morning. Like, you walk up the stairs and you know that Josh Yant's going to be standing there with a big smile on his face saying good morning.
No problem.
The first few weeks when I started doing it, they were kind of shocked.
Good, you? Thank you.
Not many people hold doors, right? But after that, people started to open up to me. Opening a door is more than a physical act. It's about putting yourself out there, getting to know people, making them feel comfortable, making them feel welcome.
Thank you. No problem.
Opening doors, it gives people hope that people care.
I think that was his way of saying I'm here and I'm not going to be invisible anymore.
He had literally, just by holding doors and saying good morning, he had he'd made a drastic change in his life.
It was definitely a positive effect. Like, it made people want to do nice things for other people. Like, he set a good example for other students.
Everything changed huge. I mean, everyone said it. All the teachers, the students felt it. They talked about it, you know, that he changed things in the school. And he was a changed Josh.
We were honored to have Josh. We were privileged. Any school would have benefited.
I think Prom King was a way to say thank you from the students and the staff. So when he won, it was like his moment to shine.
When we heard Josh Yant's name pulled out, it was like pretty much everyone should have just ran up there and been Prom King because it felt like everybody won.
Yeah, he's standing tall and straight. He's got the big grin on his face and got the crown.
I never expected to get an award or anything like that. I was just happy enough to make it through.
Just 1 year and things are totally turned around, totally. And it would have been fine if the story stopped there. It could have, and it would have been okay. And he still would have been the same person.
All right, guys, so now is the moment. Let's all line up at the side of the room. Once we're all lined up quietly, we will head down to the gym.
I would have never thought he would be a public speaker because he had been so shy, but he took to public speaking like a duck to water.
He draws them in, and it's this aura, it's this personality that he exudes. He's been there, and so they relate to him in that respect.
When I'd heard your story, it kind of made me feel like I could be more like myself.
It changed the way I thought about things. It changed the way, how I felt about myself.
I personally think that you shouldn't let, what's going on around you affect your personality or the way you act.
I think he shows them just be courageous. You know, don't let the bullies get you down. Just, you know, fight back in your own way, maybe with a little kindness.
It's amazing how just one simple act can change your whole life. I never thought doing something so simple could be so rewarding.
Oh, I never see these videos and they get me. All right, so Josh's story, I'd say some of you typed in the chat box, his mother was his support system. And then as he started getting involved there at school, how then students came alongside him. But, you know, if we had longer time to really digest that whole story, he's talking about, you know, after his father died, and other students observed that by him putting pictures on his locker of losing his father, and kids, how you know, how cruel for other kids to come in and tear down those photos. So then Josh decides he's just going to be alone, but inside him, he doesn't want to be somewhere that he feels he's invisible or a nobody. And so by both of those stories, I want you to see that as you become a trauma-informed community, that there is a lot of healing that takes place by the services that you offer and then the interactions that you have. And so in 2019, Johns Hopkins published the Protective Childhood Experiences Study. Dr. Christina Bethel, I'm going to speak in Asheville with her coming up in October on resiliency and becoming resilient communities. Well, this is her work and her team. And what they did was they began to look at 6,188 adults in Wisconsin data that have been collected around ACEs. And what they wanted to see is in the life of someone who experiences ACEs, is there any significance to also having positive childhood experiences? And what they showed was that though ACEs may be fact, they are not fate. And that kids who experience many positive childhood experiences during childhood become adults who can seek support, get care, and adults who can get support and have care if they do have mental health needs. So by having these positive childhood experiences, help them to be better equipped as an adult to seek out help, even if they did have a mental health need. And they showed in this study that the relationship between positive experiences and good mental health is dose responsive. That means the more positive a child has, the better their mental health is likely to be. Kind of like back to our story about the fulcrum at Topper Academy. So 7 positive childhood experiences that the PACES study showed was that these adults had in their childhood the ability to talk with family about feelings. They felt their experience with family was supportive during difficult times, and they enjoyed participating in community traditions. They had a feeling of belonging in their high school. They had a feeling of being supported by friends. They had at least 2 non-parent adults who genuinely cared. And there was a feeling of being safe and protected by an adult in the home. So the study showed the more as a community and an organization that we began to focus on providing protective factors and promotive factors, that there was a decrease in the risk factors. All right, here's a quick little video, about 4 minutes, from the Center for Disease Controls. And I want you to listen and see in this little narrative story, what are some of the protective factors that this young man found in his community as a child that helped his family to get on their feet. And now what he's doing as a mentor to another child. Then we'll talk about that.
Hi, this is my neighborhood. I grew up in this building. This is a great community now, but it's had its share of problems. When I was a kid, our community had high unemployment, a lack of resources for families, and lots of kids hanging out with no adult supervision. You might have heard about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. ACEs are traumatic events in childhood, like abuse and neglect, that can increase risk for future problems. But they don't have to. The good news is that ACEs and their consequences can be prevented. Take me, for example. I was at risk for ACEs, and despite all the things that put me at risk, some pretty incredible people helped make sure that I wouldn't become another statistic. Come on, I'll show you around. That's Jackson. He's a cool kid. His dad left when he was 2, and his mom works 2 jobs. I hang out with him every Thursday night and help him with his homework. Sometimes we grab ice cream. It's fun. Plus, he has another adult role model to learn from and trust. That's Mr. Martino. When I was a kid, he let me help him at the store sometimes after school when my parents were working late. He did that for a bunch of us. My dad actually found his job as a mechanic because of Mr. Martino. This helped our family in so many ways. Not only did my dad have a steady paycheck, which eased his stress about paying rent and buying necessities like food and clothes, but he was also a lot nicer to me, my brother, and my mom once he started working a job that made him feel good about himself. When communities come together, they can do so much to prevent ACEs. Mr. Martino and other local business owners put together a series of career workshops to help people like my dad find work. My mom also got a job with a company that allowed her to work from home and spend more time with me and my brother. Mariana has just gotten out of a class about handling challenges of single parenting. The clinic offers free childcare so Mariana's daughter, Ella, can play while Mariana's in class. The class helps parents like Mariana develop positive parenting skills, not just for babies and toddlers, but for teenagers too. This is another way our community has come together to give families the resources they need, and just one more way to prevent ACEs. This was my school, Riverside Middle, right in the heart of town. These kids are here for a sponsored summer camp. This community-supported program helps families with affordable, quality childcare and helps kids get tutoring and learn life skills. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time at this school all year long. There was one counselor, Miss Greer, who I remember more than anyone. She was a really good listener. Miss Greer helped me and my brother get involved in after-school activities like baseball and soccer. Our coaches were super nice and were mentors to us. Staying after school for practice kept us and a lot of other kids out of trouble. When schools help take responsibility for preventing ACEs, everybody wins. My life could have gone in a completely different direction. Studies show that ACEs can have long-term negative effects on kids' health and well-being that may last into adulthood and even continue in future generations. But by people and groups taking action, ACEs can be prevented. In fact, there are 5 known strategies that help stop ACEs before they even start. You can implement them in your own community, just like we did. How? By strengthening economic support for families. By changing social norms to support parents in positive parenting. By providing quality care and education early in life. By enhancing parenting skills to promote healthy child development. And by intervening to lessen harms and prevent future risk. So, now you know my story, and you've seen the prevention strategies in my community that helped me beat the odds. I had healthy relationships with my family and friends. I learned how to take care of myself and make good choices. And today, I'm a mentor to other kids who need some extra help so they don't become an ACEs statistic. Safe, stable, and nurturing relationships and environments are essential to prevent child abuse and neglect and to assure that all kids reach their full potential. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Banana split? You got it.
All right. Okay. I know we're right at our almost break mark, but give me just a minute here and we'll finish this module and then we'll take our break. Okay. So in the video there, it talked about family protective factors. So they talked about who's your concrete support in a time of need. You may have many friends, but yet who's the ones you're going to call in maybe the middle of the night if you needed childcare help or had to take a loved one to the hospital. And that would be who's our concrete support. What about our social connections, parenting skills? And you could see there, they were finding some untraditional ways to implement parenting skills. I've worked with some cities that are rolling out parenting academy in some unlikely places like the housing authority or maybe in a public library. And then to focus on personal resilience, helping develop social emotional competence and the ability to foster nurturing attachment. And then as the video pointed out, what are some community protective factors? Safe schools, safe neighborhoods, stable, safe housing, access to nutritious food, access to employment, access to medical care, including behavioral health, transportation. You know, in California, it may be different, but here in my community, You better not need a bus at night or on all the weekend hours, because you're not going to have transportation to get to your job during some of those off hours. And then access to safe, high quality, affordable childcare. And then that our programming is done with inclusion and equity related to race, ethnicity, and disability. And so one example of a community protective factor is this marvelous program that you all, and today we're helping to equip you to be involved in, called Handle with Care. And it works very simply and at very little cost. So if a law enforcement officer encounters a child during a call, that child's information is forwarded to the school before the next day begins. Then the school implements a class and whole school trauma sensitive approach so that traumatized children are literally handled with care. And then the school leadership, if a child needs more intervention, then the leadership makes referral for the child to see trauma-focused mental health providers. So right here, this is our last slide in this module. Well, one more. We see how that healing communities grow. So I turned the pyramid upside down to show that the bulk of the healing can come in our schools, our town, by becoming more resilient communities that, like in Chad, like in Josh's situation, that they had support navigating very difficult situations by having a trauma-informed community wrapped around him. The school system I was working with last week, after the first year in 2019, when they had this very similar training, do you know what some of the teachers did? They trained some of the seniors in high school, and the high school seniors realized that some of their peers, the reason they come in clothes smelling bad and not new clothes, wearing the same clothes over and over, is because these young people have no one at home that's doing the laundry or providing hygiene projects. So they started a program called Suds for Buds. And the young people in the school solicited donations from the community of deodorant and shampoo. And with no shaming or blaming, their co-students can take advantage of that. They started a clothing closet. And guess what? I just learned that the superintendent said that they got money and they bought a washer and a dryer for Chilhowie High School. And now seniors in that high school are running a laundry program that's helping their co-students because they're not having that support at home. So do you see the kind of healing that takes place at that level? And then we see our middle level, where there's more targeted hand-holding, so to speak. Trauma survivors are overwhelmed with hard places in life, but now by coming alongside and helping to have one-stop shop. I'm on the board of our Boys and Girls Club, and we did this last winter. We had a family engagement series for 8 weeks. I brought in Goodwill Industries to do job skill training. We did Dress for Success, resume writing. I brought in a credit union who did financial literacy, and we did it all there at the Boys and Girls Club. What are we doing? We're supporting our families and helping them heal. And then lastly, we want to create a clear path to clinical and behavioral health resources when they are needed. So I want you to say, as we get ready for our break, think about your organization today and how does it have charging stations? When I was flying a few weeks ago in the airport in Dallas, when you're waiting on your next flight, all the furniture now has little plug-ins because we're traveling with smartphones and iPads and tablets, and we need to charge those up. And so how are we creating an organization that has charging stations, so to speak? How are we interacting with those we serve and with our coworkers? All right, so healing begins by thinking about resiliency. And as the positive childhood experiences studies showed, is that these things can actually buffer against the negative effects of childhood trauma. Woo, we made it. All right, on my clock, it is 1:07. So I'm setting my timer for 15 minutes and we will start right as it rings. We're taking a break. All right, welcome back from the break. Now we're going to change gears and we're going to talk about the ACEs study and then the prevalence of trauma, so that if you decide as an organization to do screening for ACEs, which I know your Surgeon General is got a very well laid out plan and training that come along with helping you to screen the people that you serve, whether you do that or whether as an organization you decide to use what we call universal precaution. You're going to understand the rationale for that by this module. Okay, so we're going to cover in this section understanding the ACEs study, adverse childhood experiences, and then the prevalence, national statistics of prevalence of trauma. And then we're going to watch about a 23-minute clip of a survivor story. And as I do a lot of work in the criminal justice system, I'll be in September in Delaware training Delaware State Police. Delaware is also launching a Handle with Care initiative, and I have a trauma certified trauma-informed policing training. And if you ever had 30 minutes with a judge or a DA or a prosecutor and wanted them to connect the dots between trauma and drugs and the criminal justice system, this story that we're going to show you, she puts it in such wonderful words to really show how these are connected. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is watch a 5-minute little video that's done by the same people that created Paper Tigers and the movie Resilience, and it does a fantastic job explaining the ACEs study.
What does your parents' divorce have to do with your risk for heart disease? If your mother had a drinking problem when you were growing up, are you more likely to suffer from depression as an adult? Here's what you should know about ACEs. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences, extremely stressful events that can happen to a child growing up. Some experiences are so stressful that they can alter brain development, as well as the immune system, increasing the risk of lifelong health and social problems in adulthood. The term comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, landmark research that shed new light on the root cause of everything from stroke and liver disease to substance abuse and mental illness. In the late 1990s, an epidemiologist from the Centers for Disease Control and a preventive medicine doctor at Kaiser Permanente set out to understand the association between childhood experience and lifelong health. They asked over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Health Plan in San Diego about their health history, as well as difficult questions about their experiences growing up. Anda and Felitti tallied up 10 different kinds of adversity in this largely middle-class and college-educated population. They were stunned to see how common ACEs were. 21% of all respondents were sexually abused as children. 19% grew up with someone who suffered mental illness. 28% had been physically abused. And 2 out of 3 respondents had experienced at least one ACE. The researchers next looked at how someone's ACE score, or the number of adversities they experienced, related to a wide array of serious health and social problems. They saw that the more ACEs someone had, the greater their risk for poor outcomes compared with someone with no ACEs. Someone with an ACE score of 4 had twice the risk of heart disease and cancer. Someone with an ACE score of 5 had an 8 times greater chance of being an alcoholic. And those with an ACE score of 6 or more, on average, died 20 years earlier. With every major problem they looked at in the ACE study, the risk went up for each additional adverse experience in childhood. As Dr. Robert Anda says, what's predictable is preventable. It's important to remember that ACEs are not destiny. ACEs are a tool for understanding the health of a population as a whole. For individuals, an ACE score can be a tool for understanding their own risk for health and social problems and empower them to make changes for themselves and their children. ACEs tend to get passed down from generation to generation and are common across all income levels, races, and cultures. But increasingly, people of all different professions and backgrounds are coming together to discuss how ACEs affect their communities. They're finding new ways to treat and prevent ACEs. Many doctors are starting to screen their patients for ACEs as part of their medical history. More schools are becoming trauma-informed, considering the source of problem behavior when disciplining their students, instead of immediately suspending or expelling them. To learn more about interrupting the cycle of adversity and improving health and well-being for the next generation, please visit kpjrfilms.co.
All right. Let's talk. Whoa. Okay. Couldn't get them to play earlier now. Got to stop them. All right. So what did we learn in the ACEs study? All right, so the two doctors were actually doing this, they were doing work around childhood adversity separately, and then they learned about each other. So they came together and then they developed the 10-question ACEs study. 5 things did you see this in your home before the age of 18, and 5 things did this happen to you? Now, there are different variations of that have been created since that time. Dr. Roy Wade, a Harvard-trained medical doctor in the Philadelphia area, when he was finishing up medical school and learned about the ACEs study, he realized that this was done in a college-educated Caucasian group in California that were Kaiser Permanente in the health plan. So he conducted a similar study in the inner city Philadelphia area, and he added a couple of extra questions that were more relevant to a child growing up in that area. But these original 10 questions were scrolling on the screen during the video. And what they learned in that study was that if someone had 1 ACE, then there was a probability they had more. And the higher the ACE score, 3, 4, 5, these individuals were falling into the same categories as early admission to mental health services, early tobacco use, underage alcohol use, cutting, eating disorders, teenage pregnancies, suicide attempts. And so they saw that the commonality of individuals involved in these systems was that they had more than 1 ACE score. So just imagine in 2014 or 15, I was actually in California and I heard Dr. Folletti. I'd already heard about the ACEs study, but I'm working with police to reduce drug-related and violent crime, and mostly it's felony offenders. And imagine my ears hearing Dr. Folletti say, if a man answered yes to 6 of the 10 questions, he was 4,600 times more likely to be an IV drug user than if he had the answered 0 to any of the questions. And I just sat there and I thought, our program at the police department won 2 national awards in 2014. I accepted an award on the behalf of the program as the program director from the President Obama's cabinet in Breckenridge, Colorado, at the most prestigious criminal justice program of the year. Our program went on to be listed with the U.S. Department of Justice as a success story. And I wondered why in that journey, I heard no one talking about ACEs. And that's really what propelled me forward to begin to educate my town. So in the ACEs study, we saw that if life's foundation starts with adverse childhood experiences, That's going to lead to an environment of toxic stress, going to talk about lead to altered brain connections, which we covered earlier in the earlier module. That's going to lead to poor performance in school. And that's going to lead to unhealthy coping skills, which are going to lead to poorer health. And the ACEs study showed even could lead to shortened health by cutting a lifespan by 20 years. So it's not the ACEs that can cut a lifespan by 20 years, but it's the fact of choosing unhealthy coping skills like drug addiction, which then could be supported by prostitution or criminal activities and things like that, which are would lead to homelessness. And those factors, that's what's going to lead to poor health and early death. And so, and again, my thoughts when I heard about the ACEs study and the effect of it being a significant risk factor to addiction, when I literally heard that, I just pulled up on my phone or tablet American Heart Association, because in my lifetime, I know how our health plans have shifted to where if they're going to be your health insurer, they want you to partner with them in taking care of yourself. And you have to have little health classes or assessments. And I looked on the Heart Association and it talked about that if you don't exercise, you're 12% more likely to have a heart attack. Or if you're a tobacco user, you're 50% more likely to have a heart attack. And look in the last 2 or 3 decades, how many millions of dollars, if not billions, that healthcare services and insurances are providing through health education. But I wondered, where's the education about ACEs? And so that's where a lot of the work that I did, that's exactly right there. What was the incentive to begin to educate my town? So let's talk about the prevalence of trauma now. So in the mental health area, and I know we have quite a few mental health providers on our training today, and in the mental health area, a history of childhood trauma from the ACEs study, they learned that it brought about earlier first admissions to mental health services, more frequent and longer hospital stays, more time in seclusion or restraint, greater likelihood of self-injury or suicide attempts, more medication use, and increased symptom severity. Now, these next few slides are national statistics from the CDC or from SAMHSA, okay? So I was shocked, really, when I started to see the connection between childhood adversity and then people that are involved in some of the conditions which are the greatest challenges facing every community and even around the world. So we have 65% of substance abuse treatment clients report experiencing childhood trauma. 75% of women in substance abuse treatment report a history of trauma. 92% of homeless mothers have severe trauma histories. The Bill Gates Foundation on Ending Homelessness says if we ignore the piece about trauma in the life of individuals that become homeless, that could be the single biggest key to helping to solve this homeless dilemma that our nation is facing. And then this really rocked my world by seeing that nationally, 60% of American children are exposed to violence, crime, or abuse in their home, their school, or community. 40% of these children are direct victims of 2 or more violent acts. 1 in 10 children are victims of violence 5 or more times before the age of 18. In 2017, suicide was listed as the second leading cause of death among children ages 10 to 17. I mean, you think about that. And now mental health providers and the National Trauma Campaign that I serve on the strategy team for are grave concerns of mental health caregivers around COVID-19, where some children haven't been heard from by their school since March of 2020 when things shut down because the school was providing at least a healthy support system where relationships are concerned. And I had a group of university students reach out to me from Lithuania. Now I'm doing work in Lithuania. They're writing a grant, maybe that I could come there next summer. Because if you Google what country leads the world by death of suicide, it's Lithuania. In Lithuania in 2013, 1 of every 3 people took their life by suicide. And I reasoned in working with these university professionals was that if we were using trauma-informed care and ACEs knowledge to help reduce suicide among children in the US, then this could be the same intervention that would work in Lithuania. And so then we see 3 to 5 million to 10 million children witness violence against their mother. I know from working for police why that number is such a big gap in it, because it takes statistically 7 acts of violence before someone, a victim, will reach out to a shelter, reach out to a family justice center, to an advocacy program. And so there's a lot of unreported violence that children witness that is going on in their homes, and then they're coming on to school. And look at this, professionals. In a study of juvenile justice setting, 94% of the children in juvenile justice in one study had experienced trauma. So why, as a nation, as a state, as a community, should we focus on trauma in children? Because by eradicating child maltreatment in America, we could potentially reduce these many things that are predicted by ACEs: depression, alcoholism, drug use, suicide, domestic violence, and the need for incarceration. All right, now we're going to watch our survivor story. Tonier Kane, her movie is called Healing Need, and almost 2 decades after a childhood of abuse and neglect, she has an ACE score of 10, arrested 80 times, 66 criminal convictions, felony convictions, and it's almost unbelievable, her story. And my friend, Dr. Joan Galise, was conducting Tamar's Children, which is an acronym for a trauma and mental health recovery program in a Baltimore women's prison, and encountered need. And in this video, she's going to tell a portion of her own story. And now, after that, when she came out of prison, she was actually hired to work for the National Center for Trauma-Informed Care. Now she's an entrepreneur. She has a store, a retail store. She's a speaker. And it's just, you know, every time I see this story, I know that there are needs in my town, and it inspires me to continue this work. Sometimes, you know, when there are some barriers. So let's watch Healing Need.
I'm about to go back into the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women to do a presentation for the inmates here. Just 4 years ago, I was an inmate here. It's good to be on this side. It's good to be on this side.
I heard about Tonier through the different partners that we have in the community. Her name is out there. She's known by a lot of people for the positive work that she's doing. And you wonder, how could someone be so happy and jovial and have gone through all of the trauma that she's gone through in her life?
Hello. Okay, so this is B building. This is the very last housing unit that I was in. Just 4 years ago, this is my home.
In 1989, I remember the first time I was here. I went through the jail system, depths, prostitution, possession of CDS, possession of open container.
I'm coming into work at the National Association of State mental health program directors. My mother had a way of when she hit you, she would hit you with a belt, and she would hold the strap of the belt so the buckles would hit you, and she would hit you in your face and your head with it. So we often got a lot of scars from the belt buckle.
And this is my mother's birthday.
This was in '94. At this point, I was homeless, sleeping beneath a bridge, eating out of a trash can. I couldn't go in anybody's house, including my mother's. He brought me down here to get high with it. He said, you don't sleep in the bus stops no more. A lot of times I was beaten. These two houses were crack houses. Scratch down here and take a hit of crack right here. It's a very secure building. And this is my office. I have an office. I have scars. I have a scar right there. Right here I have, you can't really tell, 2 black eyes and a busted lip. Thank you for receiving us here in El Paso. My name is Tonia Kane. I was molested, I was raped, I was beaten, I was raped, and I was like, this is how it's supposed to be for me. I am nothing, I'm never gonna amount to anything, and this is how it is. And I'll stay here, I'll die just like this. And I had become comfortable with that. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Kane here to MCIW. Good evening, ladies, and thank you so much for coming out and spending a little time with me tonight. I'm so thrilled to be here, to be able to stand in front of you beautiful, wonderful women and just help you to understand that it's all about you. So I'm telling you, I'm standing before you with 83 arrests and 66 convictions. They say I was going to spend the rest of my life in jail or die in the streets. And I tell you today, not so. Not so. And, I end up with the drug addiction of 19 years. But you know what, I don't have to tell you about what it is that goes along with drug addiction, do I? I really don't. But what I want to tell you that it wasn't using drugs that was the problem. It was what happened to me as a child. My mother would entertain a lot of different men. She would be partying and you would hear her singing and, laughing. But when the music stopped, I knew I was going to start hearing the footsteps come towards our bedroom door. And at age 9, I positioned myself in front of the bedroom door to protect my brothers and sisters, but in the event, it made me available to the men. I brushed my teeth because I thought maybe I could brush away the smell of the men when they did the acts to my mouth. My mother's an alcoholic. She's always been an alcoholic, and sometimes she would leave the household 2 and 3 days at a time. Well, finally at age 11, somebody thought that something was truly wrong in our household. Because we were always looking out the windows, but we weren't allowed to play. My mother wouldn't allow us outside because she didn't want anyone to know what was going on in that apartment. Well, somebody thought that was wrong, and they called the Department of Social Services. And when social service came into the household and seen the conditions we were living in, they immediately removed us from that household and put us into foster care. Well, we ended up going to court, and I remember the court day. I was excited because I was seeing my brothers and sisters. And we were on a pew. And in the front, my mother was there. She was crying. She was real upset. And sitting beside her, y'all, I don't know where they found him at, was my father. He was sitting there. Not to say I'm going to take my kids home with me, but to give reasons why he wasn't. So 9 family members was allowed to choose each and every one of them. And I ended up with my cousin. And she was a nurturing and good person. This is my cousin. She's actually my second cousin, but when I was growing up, I always thought she was my aunt because the older generation was like aunts. But when I came into your household and you guys gave me so much love and you showed me how to take care of myself, and it was good time because I was getting up there and aging because I never knew how to wash myself or wipe myself. Barbara didn't teach me that. So you taught me all of that stuff. I remember you being in the bathroom with me, showing me how to take care of my hygiene because I didn't know. And talking to me, patiently talking to me. I wasn't used to being like a normal kid because the living situation I came out of. My mother came to the household where I was living. And she called me, Ning, because that's what my mother calls me. So I ran downstairs and I opened up the door and I ran and she hugged me and she said, I love you. I want you to come back and live with me. She told me she loved me, the words that I've been dying to hear from her. Within a week, she severely beat me in the middle of the street for trying to go to school. By then, she had had 3 more kids. I realized she wanted a babysitter. She didn't want me back because she loved me. That's my mother over there in the white. I know, I'm just saying. I know, I'm getting up though. That can't. I would desperately need my mother to love me. Sometimes I would be tired and don't want to get high, but she would want to get high, so I would go out and prostitute so she could get high, just to see if she could love me. I thought that I had to earn her love, and I thought if I go out and prostitute for some drugs, she'll be proud of me. And she would use the drugs and get mad because there's no more. But that's how I always ended up with her. How much? How much you need? $1 Yeah. Like that's good. I'm going to get a beer. I know what you're going to get. I'll be there. A big one. This time will be going, because I'm going out like. Well, I didn't know how to live without my mother, because I knew I couldn't live with her. So I remember taking an overdose. I remember waking up in the emergency room. I remember when nobody asked me, what happened to you? I remember them telling me, you're going back home with your mother, and being terrified. So she came up with this great idea that one of her drinking buddies, who thought I was cute, he was 24, I was a child basically, wanted to marry me. What was that? An opportunity to make my mother proud of me once again. I jumped on it. I'm walking down the aisle. She signed the papers, I didn't even have to be there because I was a minor. So I moved, so I'm married. I'm married and my mother's living with me, and my husband would come home and he would do like this. And if it was dust on his finger, he wanted to know what was I doing all day long that I could not dust his house. Well, there was many beatings because I didn't dust his house. Age 19, somebody came to me and said, try this. And it was crack cocaine. I ain't getting no beatings for dusting the house no more, because after one hit of crack, I cleaned my house, I went upstairs, cleaned the neighbor's house, I was outside washing everybody's car. Shoot, I ain't get that beating no more. But you know what? Using crack cocaine introduced me to the criminal justice system. Hi, sweetie. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Prostitute, and I lost 5 children to the system, but this time, she was triggered. I was wondering, is it possible she could be in a group tomorrow just to... Yeah, okay, absolutely. Did you just... So you ladies was chosen because we think that your story, you collaborating with my story, and sitting here and just doing this focus group, just talking about where you've been, and how things feel for you now and where you want to go.
My parents were heroin addicts. In the county where I'm from, there was heroin addiction. Foster care systems, psychiatric facilities. I went through all of that.
I never told my mother that my brother used to molest me. This is the first time I'm telling it now.
Well, my mother not just getting high, her friends get high. People on her job get high. I mean, they get together and have party and get high.
My father would beat my mother all the time, so I saw that. And I ended up going through it myself. Every relationship I've ever had has been abusive. And if they're not abusive towards me, I'll be abusive towards them because I feel that's how they show me love. They don't care about me if they don't put their hands on me when I do something to hurt them.
My mother sacrificed me for the sake of keeping a man. And my first time being molested, I was 4 years old. My mother took my hand and gave it to him and told me, "You going with him to play with his nieces." But when we got to where we was going, wasn't nobody there but me and him. And I remember it being really, really dark. But when I came back, I felt different. And I remember looking at my mother, and it seemed like she didn't see anything wrong. And I remember when she took me in a room that night to put me to bed, I wonder why she didn't notice I didn't have on the same panties. Even now, I'm 37 years old, and I sleep with the covers tucked under me for security.
80% of our population has been traumatized. The trauma is the underlying reason and the basis that leads to the self-medication, the drug use, and then eventually landing in jail.
But I didn't know how not to come back. I didn't know how to stay clean. And something inside of me I didn't have the motivation to want to be sober. Because I went back to my reality. Homelessness, putting myself in harm's way, staying with people that was going to beat me and hurt me and stuff. Like, so it was easy to just drink and drug. And unfortunately, it landed me right back here really quick.
Up to 90% of individuals who are in the public mental health system have been victims of trauma. About 85% we know from Department of Justice of girls in the juvenile justice systems have been the victims of early physical or sexual abuse. About 97% of homeless women who have mental health issues have been the victims of trauma while they were on the streets. 87% have been the victims of early childhood abuse. Over 50% of women in substance use programs report histories of incest. I mean, it's just universal.
And so this is the ACE study, matching in this very middle-class population. The population is exactly half women, half men by chance. 80% white, including Hispanic, 10% black, 10% Asian, 74% have been to college. In no way is this some dismissible group, that, yeah, well, maybe those people across town, etc. This is basically you and me. And what we found was extraordinary. A, the prevalence of these 10 categories, and B, the remarkable effect that they had 50 years later. 28% of the women have a history of childhood sexual abuse. I mean, who the hell would know that? In terms of injection drug use, a person exposed to any 4 of those categories was 1,350% more likely to become an injection drug user at some point later in life. If you go to ACE score 6, exposure to any 6 of those categories, you're wildly off the scale, because now it's a 4,600% increase in the likelihood that an ACE score 6 individual will become an injection drug user as compared to an ACE score 0 individual. I mean, the epidemiologists at the CDC told me, look, these are numbers that we see once in a lifetime as an epidemiologist, once in a career. So the numbers are of extraordinary magnitude. I met Tonya Kane several weeks ago at a conference here in Baltimore when this sensible young woman came up and looked me dead in the eye and told me that she had an ACE score of 10, that she had experienced all 10 of the categories that I was talking about.
I don't spend a lot of time around my mother because she, like I said, she's still abusive. But I go to, pay her bills and all, make sure she has food in the house and everything, because she's not only alcoholic now, she's a crack addict. I looked at her and I could see the sadness. She was sober, because she was just getting up in the morning. And I wanted so badly to reach out and hug her, but she wouldn't allow that. My mother won't allow us to do that. We're not even allowed to call her mom. We call her Barbara.
Any thoughts why?
I know. But I never really thought about it.
Well, maybe being called mother imposed a responsibility that she didn't feel up to.
Yeah, that's true. Well, just one particular day I had made a deal with these 2 guys, and they had like a massive amount of crack. And I went to them, I said, well, they was trying to talk to me to get me to, do some sexual things. So I said, well, if you give me this amount of drugs, I'll do this, 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 and this. Well, I thought I was a good negotiator, but I guess I wasn't, because when we were going behind this building, they started to talk among themselves. And when we got back there, they were saying, well, we're not going to give you anything, but you're still going to do this, 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 and this. And after they did that, they beat me really bad. They stomped me, spit on me. And when and they left, when I was, able to get up and get around here. It was an officer. I'm standing against his car. And when he seen me, I was walking to him and I was in a lot of pain. And when he seen me, he was like, "Miss Kane, we've been looking for you." Because I had a failure to appear warrant out. I was trying to tell him that these two guys that's walking past us laughing at me just did this to me. He thought I was trying to, I guess he thought to run off, and he thought I was resisting. So when he grabbed me, he grabbed my arm and put it behind my back and threw me against the car, which cracked my nose open. I'm not angry with them because people that do things like that, I mean, we talking about two guys that's caught up into that street world, and all they know is hurt and violence, because that's what they grew up with. And my only hope is that they're not doing that to anybody else because they think it's okay because they haven't acknowledged it, you know. But I see people that hurt me all the time, that rape me. I see them all the time. You know, and that was very small.
Tell me something about cocaine.
Mm-hmm.
What's the good part of it?
What's the good part about crack cocaine? It's a number. It absolutely, positively numbs out any feeling you have, only for a few seconds. That's why you got to keep doing it again and again. But there is no concern. So, I mean, I used to take a hit of crack cocaine, and I used to get high on the fact that I had it in my hand. It didn't even get in my system yet. But because I knew in the next few seconds, I'm going to be somewhere else, and I don't have to deal with reality. You know?
An effective treatment.
An effective treatment. Yeah.
And that kind of forces the question, treatment of what?
Right. Exactly.
Which is kind of uncomfortable for a lot of people to hear.
Yeah.
And I think I had mentioned to you about crystal meth.
Right.
And how pretty much everybody knows that's the most commonly sold street drug in the country. And no one seems to know that the first prescription antidepressant medication introduced in 1940 was methamphetamine. And it was the main prescription antidepressant for the next 20 years.
That is amazing.
So does that mean something? Yeah, and then you get to think, well, it's a lot easier to say to somebody, my kid's on crystal meth because that damn drug dealer's in the neighborhood than it is to say my kid's buying antidepressants on the street.
Right.
I couldn't use drugs and alcohol because I was in jail. So I had to find something that help me cope, and that's what helped me cope. I would fight, I would argue, I would cuss, I would go on lock, and I'd get off lock, I'd do my lock time, and, you know, oh well, see y'all later, I'll be back.
And I would mutilate myself, my thighs, my neck had cuts, my arms. And it wasn't to kill myself, just to get the pain out. That was just a way to express the trauma. I felt helpless. I felt powerless. And being a woman in a powerless situation, it brought trauma. Because the trauma came from those situations where as though I was taken advantage of and felt powerless.
Do you mind, Kristen, do you mind if I see where you would have done it yourself? Can I see that? Because I know you showed before. What do you use?
I would take and bust the glass out in my room and take the pieces of the glass and cut myself up, cut my neck. I would break the toilet seat, break the glass out in the doors and the windows. Or I take a stapler, I take the staples out the bed. Or I took an eggshell one time, the hard on the eggshell. Just to get that.
Toni is an amazing woman, a passionate advocate, a great leader in the field, an amazing speaker. We've known each other for 5 years, back when I first met Toni, when she was at the Women's House of Correction in Jessup, and she was pregnant out here. She now, as of yesterday, officially has become the team leader for the newly funded National Center for Trauma-Informed Care, which we couldn't be happier. Just a joy to be with, and when you hear her story, I think you're going to be absolutely as moved as I am every time I hear her as well. So for that, my friend, Toni Kane.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here in New York City. I'm down at Maryland Correctional Institution for Women for violation of parole. And I'm pregnant. And I'm terrified that I'm about to lose another child. And I remember running around and telling people about my fears. I don't want to lose my baby, and I'm going to have this baby.
And they were telling me about this program called Tamar's Children. Well, they say, you know, it works on your trauma. I said, well, I don't know what that is, but I know I got it. And it works on your addiction. I said, well, that's a given. Your mental health, yep, I'm crazy. You recover and you keep your baby with you. Perfect program for me, right? I was keeping my baby. And the first thing that someone said to me when I got to this program, the first session I had, my therapist told me, everything that happened to you as a child happened to you, you didn't do to yourself. And I believed her. And we started to work. See, because you good folks, you know, substance abuse, even some judges, even parole and probation, try to help me, try to give me some tools on how to live. But you know, the good information was only surface. It couldn't get where it needed to get for me to get it rooted so I can build a foundation and grow from. So my belief system can change from I am nothing to I am somebody, and I can be anything I want in this world. It wasn't so you had to get it out of me to get the good information down there where it needed to be. My therapist, her first task was to help me to feel safe. Because without feeling safe, there was no healing for me. Everything that I needed, I was able to get from this program. I had someone to help me to understand parenthood. You know, helping me to form a secure attachment with my child. I didn't know how to be a mother. You know, I know how to give birth to a baby. And then she said, it's time to work on your children. No. I said, no. How do you heal from something that's still going on? Okay, my mother didn't love me as a child. She didn't show me love. Okay, that happened. That was then. I was raped, I was hurt, I was beat, I was raped, I was hurt, I was beat. Okay, that's happening no more. But my children are still living. They're still walking this earth somewhere, and I know nothing about them. How do you heal from that? And she said, you do, but not by yourself. So I had to talk about my daughter when she was only 10 days old, and when they came and they took her away from me and they put me in jail. And the way that my son looked when they grabbed him and he was crying, Mommy, don't let them take me. I had to remember that. I had to remember my son being picked up for the weekend and never brought back. And it was work. I'm exhausted. I've been on travel now for, it seems like 2 weeks straight, like maybe going home one day just to repack. I'm just ready to go home to my daughter now and hold her. I miss her a lot. And I've really, really been missing my children a lot lately. I guess, yeah, the holidays coming up. I always get like this near the holidays. You know, I do. I miss them so much. That'll never get better. It gets easier, but it will never get better. I've been so emotional lately, and I just miss them.
Wow. I can't tell you how it impacts me every time I hear her tell her story. And wouldn't you agree that, you know, she does such a good job articulating what she learned in that group in the Baltimore prison about how the underlying trauma in her life, and then to that of her mother as an alcoholic and an addict who is violent towards her children. When she made the motion that the stuff that the therapist told her couldn't get down inside of her to help her begin her recovery journey from addiction because of the trauma. And so I just think that's pretty insightful that once somebody began to talk about the trauma, because professionals, again, I mentioned earlier on that we don't pick where we start in life, and that when individuals come from challenging beginnings in life, they begin to normalize that, and then they begin to get into risky behaviors to cope with it. So while drugs and crime are not an excuse, while trauma is not an excuse for drugs or crime, now it offers us an explanation for it. And so, there'll be many people that will spend a good deal amount of time incarcerated due to the consequences for choosing those risky behaviors. But what about like that program there, that we could infuse our justice system with programs that talk about trauma? And when I was learning about this, I began to get into bringing it into the probation program that I oversaw, and showed all the groups that came, Healing Means Story. We began to talk about coping strategies. We began to talk about the importance of utilizing the counseling that we had available there, so that people can learn. One of my colleagues in the Strong Brain Institute at ETSU, she does some work in global health, and she, before COVID, was working with some individuals in Africa. And she said it was just so amazing to see in the Africans, the women that had experienced terrible trauma through gang rape and mutilation, understand that some of their behavior, it was not them. It was related to their trauma. And a few weeks ago, I had done a 90-minute training that was recorded for my colleagues in Lithuania, and they then translated it in Lithuanian, and it was shown to social workers and youth camp leaders at the beginning of the summer, because they were going to be involved with youth during the summer, during the season when school is out. And as I watched that, they wanted me to be on the live YouTube showing of the videos, because then at the end we had a live question and answer session with a translator. And I can't tell you how it impacted me as I watched them watching my video, and social workers wiping the tears in their eyes by getting it, by understanding that some of the hard places that people start in life without healthy support lead to these things that are challenges now in all of our nations. So as we're coming down the home stretch in our training, we're going to see now how to put this all together. And I'm going to share with you some tips about how to create trauma-informed programming. So I do a series, a training called Creating Trauma-Informed Multidisciplinary Teams. I first did this at a Victims Academy in Chattanooga, Tennessee, for Tennessee Bureau of Investigation in 2017. They gathered together all the victim advocates from across the state, and we talked about in there, I gave some case studies. If you had someone who was navigating domestic violence with children in the home, name the organizations that this family might use or be involved with as they navigated this hard place. Or what about someone experiencing a rape on campus or an intimate partner violation? And so as I had the different students come up, the advocates, the professionals, quickly we could name 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 organizations that would be involved with this family during this very difficult time. And so it just began to make more and more sense why communities such as Sutter County, and the work that Michelle and Sarah are helping to lead, is that we all speak the same language, and that we bring about healing environments in our setting by offering trauma-informed approach to service delivery. So in this section, we're going to talk about why trauma-informed programs operate with a universal precaution that trauma has occurred. In our module right before the break, we gave national statistics that talked about how high the numbers are, so that we can pretty much guesstimate that 70% of the consumers that we serve, and also 70% of our workforce, are trauma survivors. Now that we've been really embedding this training in our region, rural Appalachia, for several years now, over in Bristol, Tennessee, the former mayor, a 22-year city councilwoman, a good friend of mine. She's helping to lead this work in her community. We did an ACE Aware proclamation with her as when she was mayor and I was working in healthcare. But they started a beautiful pilot to help address ACEs and trauma in the workforce. And so they have in the HR department of several groups that they partner with now, a community navigator. And so when someone in the, say in the city schools, which is one of their partners in that program, and they have a large manufacturing company. So say somebody needs a set of tires and it's payday, but if they buy the tires, they're gonna miss paying their rent. And so now, because they have a community navigator, it's a trauma-informed human resource department, the staff can go in and talk to the navigator, and there's no shaming, there's no blaming, and the navigator can maybe help them to connect with an organization that might buy a tire this month and a tire next month. And so over time, the long-term goal is to help keep the person employed. And so there are so many ways that this is being rolled out in many communities, like what we're seeing here in mine. So we're going to talk about understanding the universal precaution, the 4 R's of a trauma-informed approach, and then the SAMHSA 6 pillars and why each is important in a program. And then I'm going to give examples of each one, and then we'll finish it off with time for a few questions. Okay, so the 4 R's of a trauma-informed approach. So again, remembering with universal precaution that we have a high percentage of our consumers and families we serve are trauma survivors. So here's the approach that we want to use. So number 1, we realize the widespread impact of trauma, but we understand the good news is that there are potential paths for recovery. So by you attending this complete training today, we could pretty much check off number 1. Number 2, we recognize the signs and the symptoms of trauma and the families, the clients and the staff and others that we serve. So this training has helped equip you. I believe somebody might have a microphone unmuted. Can we mute our microphone? Thank you. So this training has helped us to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma survivors. So we could put a check at number 2. But that brings us to the 3rd R. How are we going to respond? You know, usually this training is pretty inspirational whenever it's delivered because of the content, because of the stories. And so, you know, when I think one of the keys to the success in our area, and this is what I shared last year when I was speaking at that North State ACEs Summit, is we delivered this information to our community. We kept the message simple. We kept it urgent, and every training I've ever done, we give an expectation of use, that you're to do something with this training, that you just don't hear about this training and this content of ACEs and working with trauma survivors and turn your head the other way and go on as business as usual. So one of the 4 R's of using a trauma-informed approach is, how are you going to respond? And in the early days when I worked for police, Dr. Clements created a wonderful evaluation tool that's free and downloadable in our toolkit. And that was to judge how perceptions begin to be being changed of professionals. We also had in there a little section that asked the professionals, as soon as they were being trained, what is one thing now that you have on a trauma-informed lens? Name one thing you already know in your organization that might be re-traumatizing. And people would list things like the signs, the way that people were maybe not greeted coming into the services, or maybe they had to be transported to mental health in the back of a police car in handcuffs. And so people immediately began to see and have a desire to respond. And the 4th R is, what do we need to look at in our programming that could be re-traumatizing? Okay, so now let's talk about the SAMHSA key principles of using a trauma-informed approach. These 6 principles that guide a trauma-informed change, it's a process. And one thing I want to convey in today's training is that you're trauma informed, becoming trauma informed. It's a journey. It's not a destination. The school system that I was working with last Friday, I've been working with them since 2019. During 2020, I had already trained all the teachers, all the principals. It was really awesome that the school district superintendent is who I work directly with. So we had buy-in at the top level there. And then in 2020, during COVID, I produced a video that they showed with all their cafeteria staff, their bus drivers, their school custodians. And then this year I went back and did a refresher for the principals during a leadership retreat. And then last Friday, the convocation. And so this is the district that's got the Suds for Buds, the laundry program. And now over, almost into 3 years now with a global pandemic in the middle, they've got sensory hallways, they've got calming corners. And so I want you to know that all the steps forward are necessary, and we need to be cheering on our coworkers and our co-professionals in our communities by all the processes that bring about change. So this is guiding a change process. These 6 pillars were guided and developed by national experts, including trauma survivors. And the goal was to establish a common language or framework, and they're values-based. They're not a checklist, but a way of being. And so many of the people that I've had the privilege of training and do this work with, they say they realize now they're just living a trauma-informed life. I'm going to be personal here a bit, but my husband retired last December of almost 50 years in the construction industry. And after just 3 weeks of retirement, he was in a car accident one night on a rainy evening. A young person at the university ran a stop sign, and my husband couldn't stop, and it ended up 2 cars were totaled. And thankfully, after a trip with him to the emergency room, the young people in the one car, they were not injured. And after he had a thorough exam and x-rays, he ended up just a bit bruised, but not anything broken or had to be repaired by surgery. But for a couple of weeks after that, I noticed that he didn't want to drive, and he just seemed, he's perfect for me in the fact that he's very low key. I tell people he's about as emotional as a guardrail, which is wonderful companion for me because I'm pretty high strung. And I was thinking to myself, I wondered why he just seemed so explosive. And then a little light bulb came on that he had just experienced a terrible trauma because it was someone else's, their neglect brought about a situation that he couldn't control, and loss was experienced, harm was experienced, duress was experienced. And so, I really see more and more people that get engaged in this conversation, that this trauma-informed becomes a way of life. And really, once that light came on in me, it really helped me to be a lot more patient with him and understanding. And I got him out on the bicycle trail and just did some things to help him that I knew would help be a support system to him navigating that tough place. All right, so let's talk about the 6 pillars. Here they are listed. I'm going to go through them one by one pretty quickly and describe them, and then give an example of what it might look like in a program, okay? All right, so number 1 is safety. Do you remember in the video with Neen how she talked about the first thing her counselor had to do was make her feel safe? And if we were in a hospital or in a doctor's office, when I train healthcare leaders, think about healthcare. Think about if you're a rape survivor, or if you're a trauma survivor and you go into a medical setting, you're asked to undress, turn off the lights, and sometimes someone of the opposite sex comes in to perform an exam that could be a bit painful or maybe embarrassing. So think about all the triggering. But now, as we're training healthcare providers, we're teaching them to say things like, we're going to turn the lights off, and this is what the exam is going to involve. Would you like a blanket? Would you like someone to stay with you in here while we do this? I'm going to have a nurse stay in here with me. Those kinds of things begin immediately to lower the stress level of services that need to be often offered just by the provider thinking about how can I create a sense of safety. And it's not just safety for those we serve, but we want to make sure as providers we have a sense of safety in our environment. So what would safety look like? Now, I'm always snapping photos. We were out to eat the other night and I'm in the lobby snapping photos. And my husband said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, these are great trauma-informed photos out here. Signs, they have some great signs." And it was really related to COVID and your comfort level of being served and just the language they used. Well, I think you probably have Walmart. I think if we went to the moon, there's a Walmart there. But in Walmart one day, while I was waiting for a return in customer service, I see this big blue and yellow sign, "Happy to help." Well, my goodness. If you're in customer service at Walmart, you hear any kind of reason to take anything back. And I'm sure at times your patience might be a bit stretched, but do you know what the theme is there? We're happy to help. Now, if I did a walkthrough of your hospital, your clinic, your mental health, your school, is there anything there that indicates you're actually happy to help people there? You know, have you ever been in a department store back when we used to could go shopping, and a clerk, you felt like you were bothering them to ask for a little help? So what does safety look like? Safety is a welcoming environment. And then sometimes organizations that I get involved with to help really do a deeper dive and change their culture, I have a process called an environmental scan. And we look at walking up to the building, the parking, the aesthetics, coming in, your lobby. If someone's in the lobby, is a receptionist maybe speaking loudly on the phone that could be giving information that might be personal or might be, thinking about children that are justice involved. What does it look like to have police in the schools and all these kind of things that are related to environment? Is your environment consistent and predictable? There may be some on the training today that run a smaller nonprofit with few staff and a small budget. And so sometimes you have to close the office early on Friday, and that's fine if that's the exception. But to people that are living in lives of household dysfunction and instability, like those 400 students in the city school system here in my town that are considered homeless, if we're inconsistent in our service offerings, then can you see how that sends a message that it's not a safe environment, and that our services are always offered non-shaming, non-blaming, non-violent, respectful of the privacy and confidentiality, and then clearly explaining what is happening and why. In my trauma-informed policing training, I teach officers how to reduce trauma for children on scene when their caregiver is being arrested by just leading through a simple number of questions to help that child explain what is happening next. All right, number 2, trustworthiness and transparency. So organizational operations and decisions need to be conducted with transparency, with the overall goal of building trust and maintaining that trust with your clients, your family members, staff, and others involved. And what is this going to look like? Well, it's ensuring people really understand their options. I had a mentoring program that came along and helped when I was involved with the police and our program that was a prison diversion, because many of those individuals were under house arrest. So if they had to go to the doctor or the dentist or anything outside of that program and going home or going to work, they had to have some court approved some sort of a mentor with them. Okay. Well, we had one mentor that told me one day that an individual went to the doctor and was going to need some surgery. And they knew from hearing the doctor talk about what the surgery was, they'd had a family member go through that surgery, and there was going to be a bit involved with the recovery, a little bit of discomfort, but the person they were with as a mentor didn't ask a lot of questions. And so the doctor left, and as they were riding home, home, the person said to the probationer, said, did you understand what's going to happen? And they said, honestly, I really don't. And I felt like maybe if I asked questions that, I wouldn't look very smart or whatever. And that's pretty common in a medical setting. So sometimes you be proactive as a service provider and talk about what comes next. And you know what? I don't know who's on here today that's a supervisor or a manager, but here's why people always invite me back, is that I generally give you strategies that aren't going to raise your budget. Folks, being authentic, it doesn't cost you a dime in your budget to encourage authenticity among your staff, okay? So just by being authentic in your conversation is going to help promote trustworthiness and transparency. And then directly addressing if there are limits to confidentiality. And typically that's handled through signed paperwork. If there has to be an information sharing process, but be upfront about that. What are some other ways that we show trustworthiness and transparency? By treating people with dignity, like the day that I said to the woman in the probation program that I was sorry that her story was that her mother was an addict her whole life. Matter of fact, she and I actually became friends. And when she graduated the program and the Tennessee Department of Corrections acquired that program from us at the Johnson City Police Department, it went on to become a state model. And she and her sentencing judge were on the front page of the paper when that was a pretty big deal. About 6 months ago, our governor just added $4.7 million more to further expand that program. But we were also proud of her when she was featured there in the paper as being a graduate of that program. But she talked about later that day when she was being interviewed by the media, she told me, she said, Miss Becky, the fact that I was treated with dignity and respect in this program went a long way in my healing. And then validation of people's stories. The more I train police, I've worked with the College of Nursing that had a very large grant to create a SANE nursing, sexual assault nursing certificate. And when they were interviewing police in the community, they found that most police perception, 60 to 70% of police perceived that sexual assault reporting was false reporting, which according to the FBI, only 5% of sexual assault reporting is actually false reporting. So can you see why these multidisciplinary teams are so important? So if someone is saying to police wanting to file a sexual assault report and they're the on-ramp to the justice system, and yet they don't even validate that maybe a crime had occurred, can you see where then our services begin to break down? So by validating someone's story, listening, being present in the moment, all of these build safety and trust, which are the foundations of healing. All right, number 3 is peer support. SAMHSA defines peer support as a flexible approach to building mutual healing relationships among equals based on core values and principles: voluntary, non-judgmental, respectful, reciprocal. And there's some that are very easy to think of are programs like AA or NA or Al-Anon, programs that every community has that are very effective. Why? Because they're a form of peer support. Number 4, collaboration and mutuality. So here is where we want to level the power differences between staff and our clients, even children, to demonstrate that healing happens in relationships and that everyone has a role to play. And one does not have to be a therapist to be therapeutic, and that we're mindful of the power differentials. Oh, if I had more time, I would begin to tell you stories that I have collected over the last several years of actions that professionals have taken that were therapeutic, but they were not a therapist role. Two quickly that come to mind was a story of a firefighter in the state of Mississippi. I was sent a lovely photo from someone in the justice system that happened to see this, and they had responded to a crash, a violent crash where people were injured, including a young child. And in the debris on the ground, the glass and the pieces of remnants of the vehicle, this firefighters laying on the ground with a little child strapped to an orange backboard, all taped up with a blanket covered them. And there's necessarily no sign of an adult caregiver there. So I don't know if a caregiver was injured or what was the story. But while they were waiting on the wings chopper, the firefighter is watching Happy Feet on their phone with a little child laying in the road. Folks, I know from working in a children's hospital that when that child gets to the ED, they are going to have a boatload of things to process. But one thing they're going to remember was that fireman that laid in the road and watched that little Happy Feet video waiting on the helicopter. Another one I saw on the CBS Nightly News back before COVID. A woman was telling her story of being a bus driver in rural Utah, and she told that she loved being a bus driver, and that in that particular school year, when school began, there was one bus stop with a little girl, 11 years old, that would get on the bus every day. And she just struck up a friendship with this little girl because she saw that every day she seemed so excited about coming to school, and so they greeted one another. And another thing the bus driver noticed was the little girl's hair was braided immaculately every day. Well, as the school year went on, October, November, December, around the holiday time, one day on a Monday, the bus driver noticed the little girl was not at her bus stop. The next day, not at the bus stop. Next day, not at the bus stop. All the way to Friday, the little girl was missing. And so on Monday, the bus driver was so relieved to see the little girl was on the bus. And she greeted her and said, "Oh, I missed you last week." And the little girl's head was hung, but she looked up and kind of had a smile. But the bus driver made a note to herself that the little girl's hair was not braided. Her hair was all messed up, and she thought, well, maybe the family overslept. Maybe she was, going to run late, so they didn't have time for braiding her hair. Well, the next day, the same thing. This is a CBS Evening News. The next day, the little girl at the bus stop, no braids. The next day at the bus, no braids. Thursday, finally, the little girl gets on the bus. The bus driver greets her, but her hair is not braided. And the bus driver says, "Honey, I sure miss your braids." And the little girl, with her head hung over, she said to the bus driver, "Last week, my mommy died, and my daddy doesn't know how to braid hair." And you know what, professionals? Why we're creating resilient communities, why Sutter County is creating resilient communities. That bus driver dropped the little girl off at school. She went to Walmart, got a bag of bows and a hairbrush, a clean brush. And the next day she said to the little girl, "Just stay on the bus a minute and I'll braid your hair." And when the first day she went into school with her hair braided again, the teachers noticed for the first time in almost 2 weeks, she smiled again in school. And she occasionally would hold her head back up. And over a couple more days, she kind of began to re-engage. And the teacher knew good and well what had happened to her mommy. And the teacher saw the little girl start to have a spark of life again. And she reported it to the principal, who told the school superintendent. And this story was on their local news and made the national news. That came through a bus driver. You don't have to be a therapist to be therapeutic. I've heard Bruce Perry say, who does tremendous work in this field, more healing happens in a coach's office or a locker room or a band concert with a band surrounding someone or in a teacher's classroom oftentimes than we ever see in a clinical setting. So we don't have to be a therapist to be therapeutic, and that we in collaboration, that we're mindful of power differentials. So more and more, as mental health experts are incorporating a trauma-informed approach. I heard a story of a young man that witnessed horrific killing of his mother by the stepfather, and the stepfather then killed himself. And this young boy was present, witnessing it all. And the first time he went to a counselor, the first thing the counselor said is, "I'm going to take you down to the cafeteria and I want you to pick out anything you want." And this little boy said, I was just so surprised that the first encounter I had with her, she wanted to know what mattered to me. So, number 4, collaboration. Number 5, empowerment, voice, and choice. This is where professionals, we think about the strengths that individuals that we serve have, and we recognize those strengths and how could they be built upon. And then our organizations foster a belief in resilience. I'm telling a story about resilience. It comes from a woman that you may have heard of in the faith type movement and in the faith field named Joyce Meyer. Joyce Meyer is a trauma survivor. And for her, her charging station was her faith. And you can watch YouTube videos of Joyce, and there are a few that are very specific of the things that she endured. Her father was a violent alcoholic, and from the age of 8 or 9 years old until she was 18, and she married the first guy that paid much attention to her, and that didn't last very long. But she was raped over 200 times by her father, who would come home from work and get drunk and take her in the car to the cemetery at the end of their road and rape her. And she knew her mother knew about it, but her mother would do nothing to stop it because her mother was afraid of her father. And so Joyce, who is a tremendous survivor, she talked about this story about resilience, which is a made up story, but boy, does it illustrate a great point of what our organization needs to embrace. So there was a farmer that had a donkey, and this farmer every day would get the donkey out of the barn, harness the donkey up, and talk to the donkey walking over to the pasture. And they would plow up the field in the spring and get ready to begin to put the seeds out for that year's crop. And then later in the year, when he needed to work in the field, or at the end of the fall or the harvest season to come in and harvest the crop, he'd get the donkey. And they did this year after year, and they were quite a team. And finally, the farmer got to a place where the donkey had helped him prosper enough that he was able to buy a tractor. So he put the donkey in the barn in the back fields, which is a pretty comfortable retirement by donkey standards. But one day the farmer went to the barn to get his tractor to go to work, and he looked around and he couldn't find the donkey anywhere. And so he got off the tractor and began to search. And the more he started to search, he heard some noises like maybe an animal was harmed. And so now he was a bit concerned and motivated to find his donkey. And so as the farmer searched around, he found, lo and behold, the donkey had fallen down into a dried out well shaft. And as the farmer stood above the well, 30, 40 feet down was the donkey at the bottom of the well. And the donkey looking up with such a sad face, but yet he was glad now that his friend, the farmer, had found him. But the farmer reasoned, I don't know how I'd get the donkey out. And I have my tractor now, so, I don't need the donkey anymore. So the farmer went to the barn and got a shovel, came back to the hole, and he stood at the top of the hole and took a scoop of dirt, threw it down on the donkey 3 or 4 times. Well, you can imagine the horror of the donkey at the bottom of the well, trapped in this small space. And the man who was supposed to be his friend and rescue him now is working to bury him alive. But in the little amount of movement that the donkey could make, the donkey had the idea: every time a shovel full of dirt hits my back, I will shake it off, stomp it down, shake it off, stomp it down. And the more the dirt flew, the more the donkey rose, until finally the donkey was able to walk out to safety, all because of utilizing the dirt. 2 years ago, before COVID, when I addressed the CEOs, the CNOs, and all the administration staff of 21 hospitals, I told the donkey story. And I looked them squarely in the faces, and I challenged and encouraged them that of all the things that our resumes hold, of all the things we're so proud of that we can bring to service delivery, we must be people that help others shake off the dirt like that donkey learned how. We must have a culture of believing in resilience, of believing in dreams, of believing people like Neen coming alive with new life and new vitality by people coming around who believe in resilience. And then some examples of things that we can bring into our programming to highlight the strengths of our clients are things that they may be talented in by activities that are led by clients or murals by art that they produce. And I could give you examples of some of those things that I've seen that are very effective. And then activities that turn problems into strengths. And here's an example from the juvenile system in New York that had homeless youth that were in the juvenile system. And a shop owner said, I'm getting a lot of graffiti. If you want to paint a mural out there, have at it. And these young people were very talented artists, and they knew the community felt that they were just worthless and troubled and considered them as trash. And so their workers and case managers said, why don't you paint a mural of how you see yourself? And they did the most beautiful piece of artwork here on this shop. And then the last one is cultural, historical, and gender issues. You know, now more than ever, are we in a society that needs to move past cultural stereotypes. We need to treat all people as equally valuable, human, regardless of their culture, their race, or their historical differences, that we need to recognize and address the historical trauma of racism and ensure racial equity. You know, when I worked for police in the community I live in, we have about 6 or 7% African American, but we have a large percent, maybe 20% of Hispanic. We have large migrant farms here locally. And so we were doing an assessment of our police programs, police camps, police summer activities that kids were involved. And we were saying some of the ones why we weren't drawing in more Hispanic children. And so I had a great partner with Catholic Charities, who is a leader in our community working in our Hispanic community. And lo and behold, we found that all of the forms that we sent home and the flyers to advertise our police and children programs in the summer were all in English. And so none of the families, when they were coming home, many of them couldn't read English. So we saw that we were limiting our outreach. And so we began to bring them out into Spanish. And so we need to make sure that our programs are inviting to all. And some examples of that, a Hawaii's prison, women's prison, that begin to do some paintings and murals inside the prison that would give the women a sense of the outdoor spaces in Hawaii. Then there are some different inner city and some of the bigger cities, Baltimore, Philadelphia, where they started using the faith-based community to incorporate health, because they found that many people weren't accessing health services. So they worked with the mosques and the churches, because this also eliminated transportation barriers by bringing the health services nearer to people's neighborhood. So wrapping it up, trauma-informed services are focused on the understanding of the whole individual and the context of their life experience. Trauma-informed services are infused with knowledge about the roles that violence and victimization play in the lives of survivors. Trauma-informed services are never shaming or blaming. And, you know, when our boys were growing up, we watched a lot of Disney movies, and there's one called Monsters, Inc. And there's this woman that's like a frog with the cat eye glasses, and every time someone approaches the desk, she says, hello. And so I like to say sometimes, if you're a group of doctors and you got all the doctors trained and you got all your nurses trained, but if you got the gal at the front desk that's going to be hello every time, we might want to think about, you know, all of our staff understanding. And that's why we're training bus drivers and cafeteria workers, so that every person understands that we want to offer services in a non-shaming, non-threatening or blaming way. And trauma-informed services are designed to minimize the possibility of victimization or re-traumatizing. Our services are hospitable and engaging, and they're designed to facilitate recovery, growth, resilience, and healing. And so we'll wrap it up. To make a difference in someone's life, you don't have to be brilliant, rich, beautiful, or perfect. You just have to care. And that is some of the resources that put into this training. And that is my contact information. And boom, we're right on time. This is like a Kennedy Center liftoff. So I'm going to turn it over to Julie or Sarah or Michelle to facilitate some questions.
Tremendous information, Ms. Becky. Thank you. Thank you so very much. We do have a few questions.
Great.
The first comes from Dennis, and he says, can you explain more about Community Navigator?
Oh, yes. Okay, so in that program, it's called Bristol Connect. And we also have schools around here now that hire social workers and they become navigators. So what the navigator does is they learn about programs like your food pantry, your clothing shelter, where's your job career services, and where's something, and the names of them might be different in California than they are in Tennessee, rural Appalachia, Southwest Virginia, but things like neighborhood services that'll help pay rent, where's your domestic violence shelter, how do you access it because it's always in a secretive location, that kind of thing. So your navigator is an expert on all the resources that your community has. And so people whose lives are overwhelmed with trauma or need that set of tires, but yet they're a single parent, they got to go right from work to pick up the child. They're not having the opportunity to utilize the gold mine of services that already exist in your community. So whether it's a community navigator in a school or a community navigator that now we're seeing here being embedded in the human resources, they know about these programs, they know who to call, and they help the person to access the services. So does that help?
Dennis says, thank you, makes total sense. And there was a follow-up to his question is, could you share the toolkit?
Oh yeah, if Sarah or Michelle will email me after this, I'll get you the link of the toolkit, which it's embedded in the Tennessee Department of Children's Services. And I can send you the link, or if you go to my website, beckyhaas.com, and just go to the page that says publications and media, there's an article about the toolkit and you click on it and it'll have the link. So one way or another, we'll get you the toolkit.
Thank you. And our next question is, how do you respond when the receiver of the message, I'm sorry this happened to you, feels like the person saying it is being disingenuous?
Well, that's a very, very good question. I think it's important that there be some accompanying conversation or actions so that they over time can begin to see that you're genuine in that, or you have that authenticity. I think by creating a welcoming environment in your lobby, maybe by the greeting that when people come in, it might take more than just one encounter. The woman that I heard that day in the group, I had never met her before. And I'm the director of this whole program. And I work for police. So, if I'd have known that she violated probation or failed a drug screen, I mean, my ethical duty would be to report that violation. So my role could have been very intimidating, but somehow that day, the way I said that to her, she knew that I meant it. So, if at first they seem to have a bit of a resistance, then just continue with trying to communicate that. And I think in time, most people are really shocked when we just see things from someone else's side and just express that as as another person. If I had time, I have a file of stories. I did trained homeless services, and I had a newspaper reporter that came and covered it for the paper in 2016, wrote a beautiful story. Then a few weeks later, he sends me an email that he'd been asked by the paper to go cover a story of a lady hoarding in her yard because the neighbors had filed a code violation because now there's rodents coming out of this trash pile. So he interviews her and finds out all the stuff in the yard belongs to her mother who just died. And she learns how that her mother was her hero, getting her out of a very dangerous situation with her father. And she told the reporter, though I can't really, none of the stuff in the yard has value. I just can't part with it yet because my mom was her hero. That reporter, he said, I'm so sorry, that's your story. Just like that, reported it in the paper, just like what he heard. Do you know who helped clean her yard up? The people who filed the code's violation. So I think people can pretty much detect genuineness.
Beautiful. We have Amber Soto asking or implying that she had written down at the beginning of the meeting, 85% of trauma can be mitigated by community and support services. 15% can be mitigated by direct support and 5% can be mitigated by clinical support. She's hoping you could expand on the 15% and what direct support entails.
Oh, good, good. Okay, now I just got these on notes from a webinar, or not a webinar, but a project. I'm part of a bid on a contract. And so the doctor who quoted that, I was so happy to hear somebody put some numbers to it. So my slides, when I showed Chad and Josh's story, I showed that upside down kind of a pyramid, and we talked about community resilience and what that could look like. Okay, so the middle level, that is more where we have social services, case management. Oh my, if we had more time, I could give a lot of examples of that. But say, for instance, one of the schools nearby me that's done a fabulous job with trauma-informed care, they got a community navigator, a social worker, hired her. And what they began to do was the kids that the principals and the teachers had the gravest concerns about their home life. They turned in the name to the community navigator. And what the community navigator did was begin to build a relationship with the caregivers of those children. And so over time, as they did that, they helped the families to maybe find, get on a application filled out to move into public housing if they were homeless. They helped them to understand better how to, they spent time with them, helping them how to understand how to go online and check student health records. And I literally call it warm hand holding, where often that we learned in the probation program with the offenders was we could give out a card to go here and get a welding certificate, or go here and get your driver's license. But first of all, many didn't have transportation. And with their life overwhelmed with trauma, we had to almost unpack their personalities. So we got the idea to start having quarterly a one-stop shop. We brought in Department of Transportation. We brought in free dental services. We brought in different things, the Section 8 housing, some of those, any ones that wanted to come that would interview someone that had a criminal past for housing. We brought them in. And so they could go from station to station to station to see and get help on filling out the forms. So someone's life that's overwhelmed with trauma, sometimes they're going to need help. Did you know more homeless people, almost all homeless people, have a smartphone, but they don't know keyboarding skills? And so sometimes you just need, without shaming or blaming, that kind of big brother, big sister, somebody to help you to access these things. And many people don't access the services in your town that could very well help them just because they are ashamed to ask for a little help. So that's the 15%.
Excellent. We have Patricia Ryan asking, if we want to go deeper into this work, where do we go?
Well, very good question. I have been helping organizations go in every layer of their journey. Other trainings that I have, depending on this sector, I have leadership ones, I have train the trainer, I have ones on how to do a review of your policies, procedures. There's actually best practice matrix out there for moving from trauma aware, which in my mind is what today's training helps you to accomplish. But then the next next stage is trauma sensitive. What are some actions we begin to take? The next one is trauma responsive. And lastly is trauma informed. So just hearing this training today does not make us trauma informed. It more truthfully makes us trauma aware. And when we're trauma informed, what that looks like is if you and I retire from the organization, it continues to be trauma informed, where our policies, our practices, our hiring, the university where Strong Brain Institute is at. The other day, we were working on a job description because they needed a new vice president of the university. And we helped HR put in there some trauma language that why would we be going forward as a state university with this now new institute and our vice president know nothing about trauma. And so there's truly a journey, but there are resources out there and people like myself and others that help people down the journey. So I think in talking to Michelle and Sarah, some of the goal of their ACE Awareness Grant is to help move Sutter County forward in this fashion.
It certainly is. Thank you. And we also had a question concerning continuing education units. And this is an opportunity for Sutter County Children and Families Commission and Sutter County in general to let everyone know that this is only the beginning of our partnership with Becky. She will be back for sector-specific trainings, and I'll allow Becky to elaborate on those just a tad bit more, but I can tell you that our next training is for our healthcare professionals on October 7th, and that'll be from 10:30 to 12:30. And all of the information that you're receiving here today not only will be contained in this webinar, which again will be housed on sutterkids.org under the ACEs Aware Community tab, but we will also be able to email the PowerPoint presentation as well as house that on our website. And again, you can see Becky's contact information on the screen where you can find additional resources. But Becky, if you would, elaborate on the sector-specific trainings that are to come for our community.
Sure. Well, and I'm really thrilled to be a part of this work in Sutter County. Thrilled that Sarah reached out and Michelle, that we've spent a lot of time and many emails the last few months. And so when I first began to train my town, I believed the first time I heard the ACEs story, the ACEs study. But my curiosity immediately was how to create practitioners. So at the police department, my program had 19 programs. My prevention program had 19 programs with 35 agencies. So I created this great big notebook and it had tabs for all those 35: homeless services, mental health, healthcare, corrections, housing authority, community gardening, domestic violence, you name it. And I researched, was there a meaningful application of using a trauma-informed lens in all those different services? And I filled it full of programs that I found out there. And then I began to create these trainings. And so what Michelle was talking about there is the one in October will be a 2-hour training that I delivered to hundreds of the healthcare professionals when I worked in healthcare, and it will give a bit of a review of the basics we heard today, because we will have new people joining us that won't have heard today. And then we'll talk about strategies specific to a healthcare setting. Then I developed trauma-informed policing. I've trained the Oklahoma City Police Department, 1,200 officers. I've trained numerous police. I've put trainings together to do the whole state of Tennessee. And in this training, it gives some of the background of what we have today, because police wouldn't have attended a general training maybe. And then we talk about 3 types of trauma officers can reduce: trauma on scene for children, community trauma through cultural connection, and then officer secondary trauma. Then we have trainings for teachers, and we do trainings about some of the basics. And then we talk about strategies, how to put in social emotional learning, how to bring in serve and return, how to bring in calming corners, use these calming spaces. And so instead of in-school suspension, now we have in-school choices and building connection and some of that. So the sector specific, it's going to get the groundwork of things you heard today, but then add in it tools and new skills. One of my favorite quotes is, if the only tool you have is a hammer, you view every problem as a nail. So I look at the sector specific trainings as really equipping professionals in a different sector with new skills to help better serve trauma survivors. I also have ones for judges. I've worked with juvenile justice. I've worked with criminal justices, DAs, homeless services, faith-based. I've trained many faith-based nonprofits, churches. And so there is an application for any kind of organization. So I'm going to rely heavily on Michelle and Sarah, and as they have a conversation with your community and just kind of roll those out as they feel the partners come to the table.
Wonderful. I think that wraps up all of our questions and answers in a timely manner. And on behalf of Sutter County, thank you for helping us move to being a resilient community and moving hopefully from trauma aware to trauma sensitive onto our next step of trauma informed. So thank you, Becky, for all of your expertise, your excitement, and your passion.
Oh, thank you, Michelle, and everybody that joined. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you all.